Chapter 134. You refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. I'd like to see if the formula or my life is more important. The young man looked towards a certain direction outside the forest with a vicious look on his face. He had wanted to buy the formula of the Rui Du at a low price, but he did not expect the shopkeeper to be so unappreciative and chase them out of the shop after a few words. Later on, his scheme was seen through by the shopkeeper and he failed again. Instead, his brother-in-law, who was a county lieutenant, became fearful and stopped providing him with any help. Seeing that the business of the Rui Du was booming, if he did not act now, he could only watch as the mountains of silver slipped away before his eyes. He had already sent people to find out that every morning, they would bring the Rui Du to the shop in the prefectural city. The shop would close at noon, and the shopkeeper would rent a carriage from the carriage shop to leave the prefectural city. This was the road that they had to pass. Since the soft approach did not work, he could only use the hard approach. He would intercept them on the road and force them to reveal the formula. When the time came, he would not be afraid that the shopkeeper would not speak. The men he hired were all scoundrels in the prefectural city. Each of them was good at fighting and they were paid to do things. How could they not deal with a weak scholar? This time, even if the burly man was present, there was nothing for him to worry about. 2 fists were no match for 4 hands, and he had dozens of hands on his side. Even if the other party reported the matter to the authorities, the person in charge of arresting robbers in Anxi County was his brother-in-law, so naturally the authorities would not investigate him. Moreover, there were many cases that could not be solved every year, so one more wouldn't make a difference. From the beginning to the end, he did not show himself, so the authorities would not be able to trace him. Of course, just in case, he could not open the shop in Qingyan Prefecture. The capital was a good place, and if he opened a few shops there, his business would probably be even better. Just as the young man was planning his beautiful future in his heart, a horse carriage slowly approached from afar. The carriage that they were waiting for was supposed to come from the direction of the prefecture city, but this carriage was heading in the opposite direction. The young man didn't pay much attention to it at first, but when he glanced to the side and saw a certain burly man walking in front of the carriage, his expression froze. Then he immediately said in a low voice, "All of you stay alert. When the carriage in front comes over, your targets will be the people in the carriage." And the man in the front beat him up. The dozen or so people hiding in the forest were all dressed in black, with half of their faces covered by a black cloth. They were leaning loosely against the tree, but after hearing the young man's words, they slightly raised their spirits, hid their bodies and looked outside. The carriage continued to move forward slowly. A few figures followed behind the carriage at a steady pace. Among these people, the burly man in the lead was rather eye-catching. He was also the one that the employer had taken special care of just now. These people remembered his appearance in their hearts, so that when they took action later, they could take care of him appropriately. As for the others, they didn't seem to pose much of a threat to them. They had a huge advantage in numbers and they were all very confident in their own skills, so they didn't think much of these people. Inside the carriage, Zhou Xian sat on the soft cushion, still thinking about a certain problem. If the ground beneath their feet was a big ball, then wouldn't the people on the other side of the ball fall into it? Then an even more complicated problem surfaced in his mind. If they really fell, where would they fall to? When he thought about this, Zhou Xian knew that he couldn't continue thinking about it. This was already far beyond the scope of his understanding. Whoosh! The voice of the guard driving the carriage was heard, and the carriage suddenly came to an abrupt stop. Zhou Xian's body staggered and he lifted the curtains of the carriage. He frowned and asked, "What happened? Why did we stop?" "Young master, stay in the carriage and don't come out. Something is not right in front," the guard driving the carriage said in a deep voice. Fong and the leader of the guards walked at the front, and when they looked at a certain dense forest on the side of the road, they frowned at the same time. The trees in the forest weren't thick and they couldn't hide some people's bodies. Wearing black clothes and hiding in the forest in broad daylight, these people didn't look normal no matter how they looked at it. In the forest, seeing the carriage stop there, the people around the carriage also looked over. One of the men in black said with some suspicion, "Could it be that they found us?" "Impossible, we clearly wore black clothes. But it's daytime now." As soon as someone spoke, the surrounding atmosphere suddenly became awkward. The young man's face was a little hot, because he was the one who gave the order to wear black clothes and cover their faces. Didn't those novels always say the same thing? Now wasn't the time to worry about this. Originally he wanted to wait for them to pass by and catch them off guard, but he didn't expect to be discovered so quickly. Since this was the case, of course there was no need to hide anymore. A trace of determination flashed on the young man's face, and he suddenly waved his hand and said, "Go." Fong and the other guards watched as the masked men in black rushed out of the forest. Their roars were louder than the previous one, but they were all empty-handed and had no weapons on them. The expressions on their faces were a little surprised. However, since these people were coming for them, of course they couldn't be polite. The 4 people stayed to guard the carriage while Fong, the leader of the guards, and the other 2 people went to meet the men in black. Because they had just received the young man's order, a small half of the dozen or so men in black rushed toward the carriage, while the other half headed toward Lao Fong and the others. A voice was heard saying, "Let's get rid of that man first." The man they were talking about was naturally Fong. As the employer's focus on the surface, he also seemed to be the biggest threat to them. Immediately, half of the men rushed to him. The leader of the guards was stunned when he saw this. Half of the men actually rushed to that guy and the other half to deal with the 3 of them. Wasn't this obviously looking down on them? The winner of the battle between the 2 people had not been decided yet, but in these people's eyes, it was obvious that the man surnamed Fong was stronger than them. This could not be tolerated. The leader of the guards coldly snorted, and directly rushed to the half of the men in black who were rushing to Fong. "These people are mine." Of course Fong was not to be outdone. He suddenly stamped his feet and his speed suddenly increased a little. In the blink of an eye he had already rushed to the group of men in black. The remaining 2 guards could only watch as their leader and the burly man surnamed Fong displayed their invincible might. They were like tigers that had entered a flock of sheep. Their actions were straightforward and efficient. In just a few breaths of time, the black-clothed men fell to the ground one after another. None of them could stand up again. "I have 3. I also have 3. The 2 of them looked up at the same time and with fierce eyes, they looked at the other half of the men in black who were scared stiff. They coldly snorted at the same time and rushed over again. The 2 guards heard banging sounds from time to time, and they thought that every punch must have landed on flesh. The 2 of them were stunned and did not dare to rush forward to help. Looking at the posture of the 2 men, if the 2 of them went forward they might also kill the 2 of them. They wanted to go to the other side to help, but when they turned their heads, they found that the battle around the carriage had also ended. The 4 people were still guarding the carriage and the ground was covered with men in black. Bang! With a karate chop, Fong knocked out the last man in black. When he looked up, he found that the leader of the guards had already rushed to the direction of the forest. "You don't come over." Seeing that the people he had brought with him had fallen to the ground one by one, a look of horror finally appeared on the young man's face. He saw the fierce man approaching him step by step, and as he retreated he said with a trembling voice, My brother-in-law is the county lieutenant of this county. My brother-in-law is the county lieutenant of this county. He won't let you off for hitting me." "County lieutenant, right?" A cold smile appeared on the face of the leader of the guards and he cracked the knuckles of his fingers. After a few breaths, screams began to echo in the forest. Chapter 135. Those who were dressed in black to act cool in broad daylight were just a bunch of rabble. After being beaten up by old Fong and the others, they obediently squatted in a row, not even daring to breathe loudly. Li Xian opened the curtain and took a look, then lost interest. These small matters could be handled by the guards. When Fong walked in front of those people, the person at the front immediately shivered and said with a trembling voice, "This has nothing to do with us. We were all paid to do this. Someone told us to do this." "Who ordered you to do this?" Fong clenched his fist and looked at him. As soon as his voice fell, the guard leader walked out of the forest with a young man with a swollen face. "It's him." The man in black was frightened by Fong's threatening action. He immediately pointed at the young man and said, "He told us to force the formula of Rui Du." The situation was stronger than the person. If he didn't tell the truth, he was afraid that he would taste the taste of this big man's fist again. He didn't hesitate to give up the mastermind. The young man's whole face was swollen. It took a while for Fong to find a familiar feeling. "So it's you. It was this guy who brought 2 people to the shop to force them to buy the formula of Rui Du." Fong had a deep impression of him. Young master, these people are after the formula of Ruidu. The guard leader threw the young man who had already fainted on the ground and stood in front of the carriage and said, "Leave a few people to deal with it. If there's nothing else, go back to the city." A corner of the curtain was lifted and Li Xian's voice came out. There were still a lot of unanswered questions. He didn't want to waste any more time here. "Yes." The leader of the guards responded and then whispered a few words to the 3 guards. The carriage then set off, leaving the 3 guards behind to deal with this matter. Fong looked at the carriage with a puzzled expression, then turned his head to look at the guy who had yet to determine a winner. He couldn't help but feel astonished. Son-in-law had never mentioned what these people were doing, and Fong had never taken the initiative to ask either. He only knew that these people wanted to cooperate with them on Rui Lu's business. At this moment he finally realized that this gigolo friend of his son-in-law did not seem to be an ordinary person. Go. Watching the carriage leave, the 3 guards drew out their swords and pointed at the ruffians who had already taken off their night clothes. Although there were only the 3 of them, the ruffians did not dare to act rashly or have any thoughts of resisting. After what happened just now, they realized that they had provoked someone they shouldn't have. If they behaved themselves, they might be able to avoid some physical pain. Moreover, although there were only 3 of them, each of them had extraordinary skills. If they were to really fight, they would be the ones to suffer. Moreover, the other party was holding a sword in their hands. Under the command of one of the guards, one of them carried the young man on his back and followed the rest of the people towards the prefectural city dejectedly. Qing, and prefectural city, Anxi prefectural government. County Magistrate Lu sat on a wooden armchair at the back of the hall while enjoying the massage from the beautiful concubine behind him. He was very satisfied. Ever since that unfilial son of his had been confined for half a month, he had become much more well-behaved. These days he had been well-behaved and had not caused any trouble, which made County Magistrate Lu less worried. "Lord Lu, bad news. Bad news." Before he finished tasting his tea, the beautiful concubine's hand had already moved from his shoulder to somewhere else. County Magistrate Lu squinted his eyes and the expression on his face became even more enjoyable. At this moment, a bailiff in plain clothes suddenly barged in and said with a panicked expression. The beautiful concubine's hand moved away in a hurry. County Magistrate Lu, who was enjoying the massage with his eyes squinted, was also startled. The hand holding the teacup trembled and half of the tea spilled onto the hem of his clothes. Those who did not know would probably think that there was something wrong with him. Bastard. County Magistrate Lu put down the teacup and glared at the bailiff. He said loudly, "How many times have I told you to knock on the door before coming in? Are your ears just for decoration?" County Magistrate Lu was in the prime of his life. Sometimes, when he was in the mood, it was common for him to close the door and make love with the beautiful concubine here. If someone barged in like this in a panic every time, perhaps after a few times before he could resign, his little brother would have to live in seclusion. Therefore he had long set the rule of knocking on the door before entering. "I'm sorry, Lord Lu. It's my fault." At this time the runner secretly complained in his heart. The matter was urgent and he actually forgot the county magistrate's rule. He hurriedly retreated and calmed down. Then he knocked on the door and said, "Lord Lu, I have something important to report." "Come in." After all, it was just a small bailiff. County Magistrate Lu did not care about him, but his voice still contained anger. "What's the matter? Say it." County Magistrate Lu picked up the teacup again, took a sip of tea and said lightly. These guys who had never seen the world, usually made a fuss about little things as if the sky was going to fall. This was the county government. Would anyone rebel? The bailiff bowed respectfully and said unhurriedly, "Lord Lu, several people just said that they came from Prince Ning's mansion. They took many people to the county government and even arrested the county lieutenant." Puff. County Magistrate Lu spat out the tea before he swallowed it. The teacup fell from his hand, and the hem of his clothes was completely wet by the tea. He suddenly stood up from the chair and asked loudly, "What did you just say?" The bailiff was also shocked and hurriedly repeated, "People from Prince Ning's mansion came and arrested the county lieutenant. They are waiting for you in the front hall." "Why didn't you say such a big thing earlier?" County Magistrate Lu showed anger on his face. He kicked the bailiff to the ground and hurriedly ran out without even changing his official uniform. He did not dare to let the people from Prince Ning's mansion wait for him. Speaking of which, he was quite aggrieved as a county magistrate. In other counties, the county magistrate was a big shot who could cover the sky with one hand. However, in Anxi County in Qing'an Prefecture, the number of people who could crush him to death could not be counted with two hands. Prince Ning's mansion was the biggest monster that he could not afford to offend. As the blood brother of the current emperor, he was deeply trusted by the emperor and held great power. He had to be careful even if he was just a steward in the mansion. The bailiff struggled to get up from the ground. He touched his chest and said in a low voice with great grievance, "Didn't you ask me to knock before coming in?" County Magistrate Lu hurriedly ran from the back hall to the front hall. As soon as he stepped into the door, he saw more than 10 people squatting on the ground. The one at the innermost with a knife against his neck was County Lieutenant Zhou, who was still in a daze. County Magistrate Lu's heart sank at once when he looked at those men with sabers who wore stern expressions. This time he might really have pierced the sky. Chapter 136. In the front hall, in addition to these people, there were also many yamen runners. At this time they were holding water and fire rods and looking at the guards of Prince Ning mansion with vigilance. They looked very nervous. After seeing County Magistrate Lu appear, they let out a long sigh of relief. Just now, these people swaggered into the county government and arrested County Magistrate Zhou without any explanation. At first they thought that someone was rebelling and wanted to arrest them first. But after hearing that they were from Prince Ning mansion, they dared not to act rashly. They were just lowly yamen runners. It was better not to provoke this kind of thing. In front of so many people, County Magistrate Lu had to show some dignity. He tidied his clothes and walked in slowly. Glancing at County Magistrate Zhou, he looked as usual and asked those guards, "I'm the county magistrate of this county. May I know who you are?" Before he finished his words, a guard took out a token from his waist. After recognizing the symbol of Prince Ning mansion on it, County Magistrate Lu no longer had any doubts in his heart. He pointed to County Magistrate Zhou and said, "May I know what crime County Magistrate Zhou has committed to make you mobilize so many people?" In fact, County Magistrate Lu was extremely dissatisfied with these people from Prince Ning mansion. No matter what, this was the Anxi County government, his territory. These people had captured his subordinates without distinguishing between right and wrong, and they even had a deadpan expression on their faces. Anyone would be displeased if they were in his shoes. However, they were Prince Ning's men after all, so he dared not show his dissatisfaction. "Is it a big crime to cover up and connive at the assassin who assassinated the young prince?" The guard looked at him coldly and asked. "What?" Hearing this, County Magistrate Lu's indifferent face disappeared. He staggered and almost fell to the ground in fear. He turned his head to look at County Magistrate Zhou with a strong disbelief and admiration on his face. He even dared to cover up the assassin who assassinated the young prince. Why didn't he know that County Magistrate Zhou was so bold? Even he, County Magistrate Lu, dared not do this. What County Magistrate Lu didn't know was that County Magistrate Zhou was also shocked at this time. When did he cover up the assassin who assassinated the young prince? He wouldn't dare to do that even if he was 10 times more courageous. Although he didn't know why these people would wrongly accuse him, there was one thing he was very clear about. If he didn't explain himself clearly, he would really die today. Assassinating a relative of the imperial family, the lightest punishment would be exile for 3,000 miles. If it was a little more serious, it was even possible to lose one's head. Even if it was covering up, it was still a very serious crime. Just at this time, the young man lying in the corner finally woke up. As he opened his eyes, he saw his brother-in-law, who was the county magistrate, and finally released the grievances in his heart and shouted, "Brother-in-law, they beat me. Arrest them." It was also at this time that the young man lying in the corner finally woke up. As soon as he opened his eyes, he saw his brother-in-law, who was a county lieutenant. The countless grievances in his heart were finally released. He shouted loudly, "Brother-in-law, they beat me. Quick, send someone to arrest them." Unlike the county magistrate who needed to be appointed by the emperor, the county magistrate had always been appointed by the local government. They were mainly in charge of justice, arresting bandits, collecting taxes and other affairs. Although they didn't have a high position in the eyes of ordinary people, it was already a very high position. The county magistrate was in charge of the administrative affairs of the county, and it was the county magistrate who was in charge of the specific execution. Judging cases and collecting taxes were all the duties of the county magistrate, which were closely related to the people. To a certain extent, having a county magistrate as his brother-in-law was enough for him to do whatever he wanted in Anxi County. Although there were many people here that he couldn't afford to offend, it definitely didn't include these guys who came from the mountains. "Brother-in-law, they beat me. Arrest them." When the young man shouted, County Magistrate Zhou couldn't say a word anymore, as if he was choked by someone. Just now, with a knife against his neck, he was so frightened that he didn't see the unconscious young man at all. County Magistrate Zhou opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His face was pale. He never expected this. County Magistrate Liu also looked at the young man in astonishment. The one who assassinated the young prince was actually County Magistrate Zhou's brother-in-law? In that case, there was nothing more to say. Although he didn't believe that guy actually had the guts to rush to assassinate the young prince. No matter whether there was any misunderstanding or not, County Magistrate Zhou couldn't escape this time. It was probably because of his brother-in-law, who was a county magistrate, that the young man could rely on him and run amok everywhere. This time he finally kicked a hard iron plate. It seemed that County Magistrate Zhou didn't know anything about this matter, but since such a thing had happened, his position as county magistrate would definitely be gone. As for what kind of punishment he would have after his dismissal, it could only depend on Prince Ning's mansion's attitude. "No, after I go back, I have to restrain that unfilial son of mine. If he continued to act like he did before, I'm afraid that tomorrow's County Magistrate Liu would be today's County Magistrate Zhou." At this time, it was not County Magistrate Zhou who hated the young man the most, but those ruffians who were hired by him. More than a dozen pairs of fiery eyes stared at him as if they wanted to skin him alive. They thought it was just an ordinary fight, but who would have thought that the other party was actually a young prince? Just for a tale of silver, they even sacrificed their lives. At this time, the young man had already sensed that something was wrong. He stared blankly at County Magistrate Zhou, who still had a knife on his neck, and stopped shouting. His heart gradually sank. These people's target was obviously not Zhou Xian, but since it involved the young prince, they naturally couldn't let them go so easily. Beheading and exiling them was a bit too severe, and it also needed to be approved by the emperor. Although these people were wrong, they didn't deserve death. However, forcibly snatching the formula of Ruidu also targeted Prince Ning's mansion. Even if they didn't die, they would still lose a layer of skin. Seeing that the people of Prince Ning's mansion didn't seem to want to make the matter bigger, County Magistrate Liu let out a long sigh in his heart. However, he didn't expect that the popular Ruidu in Qing and mansion was actually Prince Ning's mansion's business, which really surprised him. It must be said that County Magistrate Zhou was really unlucky to meet such an outrageous relative who even dared to snatch the Prince Ning's mansion's business. No matter what, the county magistrate was one of the big shots in the county government. What happened in the county government today quickly spread out. "Did you hear? Something happened in the county government today." "No way, what could happen in the county government?" "I also heard from the brothers who work in the county government. This time, County Magistrate Zhou is probably in big trouble. I heard that it was County Magistrate Zhou's brother-in-law who asked someone to force the formula of Ruidu. I didn't expect that Ruidu was also related to Prince Ning's mansion." "Ruidu? You mean the Ruidu sold in Rui Workshop in the city?" "Other than Rui Workshop, which other shop in the city sells Ruidu?" "What Ruidu is related to Prince Ning's mansion?" In a courtyard with high walls, there came the sound of a teacup shattering. How could it be? Hearing this news, a famous rich merchant in Qing and mansion was dumbfounded. "Fortunately, we haven't done anything otherwise." In other places, there were also people who were shocked and broke out in a cold sweat. Chapter 137. Li Yi only found out about this after Fong and the others returned from the prefectural city. Li Yi could only mourn for the fool who wanted to block Li Xian's carriage. He had originally thought that when the shop operated by Ning Wangfu opened, those who were eyeing Rui's Lu would naturally give up on their evil thoughts. After being stirred up by that foppish son, everyone had probably gotten wind of it and no longer dared to have any thoughts about Rui's Lu. After calming down and thinking carefully, The conclusion Li Yi arrived at made him sigh endlessly. If he didn't know Li Xian and didn't cooperate with Ning Wangfu on Rui's Lu, even a small county officer would have brought him a lot of trouble. After all, one was a commoner and the other was an official. The people who came to frame them and the constables who colluded with them were most likely instructed by the county officer. In this day and age, it was better to be an official. If he was a county officer, wouldn't there be none of these things? Of course, if he really wanted to be a county officer, Li Yi was also unwilling. It wasn't worth it to do so many things with such a small salary. Wouldn't it be better to hold on to the thigh of Ning Wangfu? Wouldn't it be better than being some county magistrate? Of course, distant water couldn't quench immediate thirst. Not every time something happened, Li Xian would appear at the right time. If he could hold on to one more thigh, he would have one more choice when the time came. Therefore, when the patrolling female arrestor passed by the entrance of the shop, Li Yi greeted her politely. "Arrestor Li, you're patrolling the streets again. Do you want to come in and have a cup of water? Do you have wine?" The girl in light blue looked at him and raised her eyebrows as she asked. "Yes." Li Yi replied with a smile. The wine was a strong liquor made using the distillation method. Before the wine shop that cooperated with Ning Wangfu opened, it was the only one in Qing and prefectural city. If there was wine, there would naturally be dishes. Things were different now compared to when he first came here. With money, he didn't have to live a life without much money. 2 cold dishes and 2 hot dishes were made by Li Yi himself. They were perfect to go with wine. "Constable Li, please." Immerse Li looked at the dishes on the table as a look of astonishment flashed across her face. "Didn't you say that you only came in for a glass of water?" No matter how he looked at it, the scene in front of him seemed to have been prepared. He glanced at Li Yi and sat down. Regardless of what he was thinking, at least the dishes and wine looked good. It could be seen that he had put some effort into it. He picked up his chopsticks and took a bite of the side dish that smelled pretty good. He was very satisfied with this unique taste. "What's the matter? Say it." He took another sip of wine and looked at Li Yi indifferently. She actually admired this scholar's ability. For the sake of this table of dishes and wine, if his request was not too excessive, she would consider it. "Constable Li, you misunderstood. If it wasn't for you, I'm afraid that the lawsuit at Rui restaurant would have been unavoidable. This is just a small dish and wine to express my gratitude." Li Yi smiled and looked at her calmly. He really didn't have anything to ask of this female constable at the moment. Even if he did, he couldn't say it out loud. As the saying goes, if you take something from someone, you'll have to bear the consequences. The Anxi County government was not far from the shop. If this princess dined and drank here for a few times, how could she stand by and watch when something really happened in the future? He was only building a good relationship now. Of course, he couldn't casually ask for anything. "It's my duty. No need to thank me." Immerse Li glanced at him and continued to eat and drink. Needless to say, these dishes and wine were very much to her taste. "I heard that you've cooperated with Prince Ning Mansion in the business of Rui nectar?" Li Yi nodded. The news had spread pretty fast. Today was only the 2nd day. "You're smart." The wine that old Fong had secretly hidden was almost finished by her, but her expression did not change. She looked at Li Yi with a rare hint of approval in her eyes. It was undeniable that Rui nectar was a good thing. It contained a huge profit. Few people could resist the temptation. If one didn't have enough power, he couldn't protect such a treasure. It wouldn't be long before he was devoured by those people. The smartest way was to climb up a higher tree and give up a part of the profit to protect himself. But she didn't expect him to have the ability to climb up to Prince Ning Mansion. It seemed that his relationship with her cousin was not ordinary. When Immerse Li thought of this, someone walked in from the door. The next moment, Li Xian looked at her in surprise and asked, "Immerse, why are you here?" After saying this, he suddenly sniffed and asked, "What's so fragrant?" Following the fragrance, he looked at the wine and dishes on the table. After a while, there was another pair of chopsticks on the table. Li Xian looked at his cousin who was drinking by herself on the side with some confusion. He was a little confused about why she would appear here, but his attention was soon attracted by the wine and dishes in front of him. He poured a cup of wine and just picked it up, thinking that he came here for official business today. He hesitated and put it down. He looked at Li Yi and asked, "You said that the ground under our feet is round. Do you have any proof?" "No." Li Yi took a sip of tea and said straightforwardly, With Li Xian's curious baby personality, if he explained, the other would definitely ask questions endlessly. It was better not to give him any chance. Then what you said last time, why do leaves fall to the ground, why do mirrors appear in the water, and… Li Xian didn't dwell on the question just now. Anyway, he still had a lot of questions and there would be opportunities to ask. The expression on Li Yi's face froze. Then he looked at him and said seriously, let's talk about the problem of the ground being round. Li Xian looked up at him, waiting for him to explain. Actually, to be accurate, it should be a ball and not so round. This problem was actually not difficult to explain. The curved sea surface, the ships that came from the sea would always see the mast first, and when they looked up at the sky, the two sides were low and the middle was high. These common phenomena in daily life could all be explained. Even using an analogy, it could be easily explained. The moon and the sun were both round, but the ground under their feet was square. Wasn't it a little weird and unsociable? However, Li Xian had never seen the sea before. He ran to the courtyard to look at the sky, but he couldn't see the difference between the height of the sky and the height of the moon, nor could he understand the relationship between the moon and the ground under their feet. Li Yi began to feel a headache. I'm going to patrol the streets. Emmingzi finally understood why the two of them had such a close relationship. It was very normal for two people who were suffering from hysteria to feel like they understood each other. Chapter 138. In Ning Wang Fu, in a certain room, Steward Wang looked at a stack of account books in front of him. Worry appeared on his chubby face. As the steward that was responsible for managing the outside businesses of the Wang Fu, he had the habit of thoroughly checking the accounts every month. This way he could understand the income of the Wang Fu every month. Compared to previous years, it had increased or decreased, and where the reason was. If the income decreased by too much, it would be hard for him to explain it to his superiors. And this was the problem he was currently worrying about. It was almost the end of the year. Even if he added up all of the profits of the Wang Fu's outside businesses, it would only be half of what it was last year. 2 months later, it would only be 70% of what it was last year. That would be his negligence. If Wang Yi blamed him, he would most likely not be able to keep his position as the steward. Luckily, the Rui Du and Spirit Wine Factory had already started operations. The shops in the city would officially open tomorrow. These two businesses were his greatest hopes. But he wasn't sure how much profit he would be able to make. What if… Steward Wang felt uneasy. Just as he was feeling vexed, the door was suddenly pushed open by someone. A brat about 10 years old ran in. The brat's little face was still slightly immature, but it was 70 to 80% similar to Steward Wang. Especially his round body and round face. He ran in front of Steward Wang and stretched out a chubby little hand. He said, "Daddy, give me a few copper coins, I want to buy candied haws to eat." Steward Wang was feeling vexed when he suddenly saw the brat's round face. A nameless fire rose in his heart and he scolded, "Eat, eat, eat, all you know is to eat. Look at what you've eaten." The brat was still thinking about going out later to try the sugar snowball that Lu Shi's candied haws had released a few days ago. He had heard a few of his friends say that the sugar snowball tasted even better than the candied haws. He impatiently ran in to ask his father for money and was scolded for no reason. He froze where he was. "Have you memorized all the lessons that teacher taught you?" Seeing the brat standing there in a daze, housekeeper Wang became even angrier and asked with a straight face. He was not cut out for studying and only managed to pass the elementary scholar exam. After that, he suffered many setbacks and eventually found a job in the prince's mansion. Over the past 10 years, he had worked his way up to where he was today. Although the other high scholars did not live as well as he did, but studying was the right thing to do. He wanted to hand over his unfulfilled dream to his son, but who would have thought that this brat had no interest in studying and would never forget to eat? He was really his biological son. Yes, I can. The naughty brat still had some eyesight. He knew that he couldn't provoke his father right now, so he stuttered. "Recite it for me." He didn't know what was wrong with his father today. Why did he suddenly want to test him on his homework? The devilish brat rejoiced in his heart. Fortunately, he had memorized those convoluted words yesterday. He immediately recited them. Although he stumbled, he didn't make any mistakes. After listening to the naughty child recite it, housekeeper Wang's expression finally became a little better. However, he had some doubts in his heart. In the past, when he was tested on his homework, this brat had never been able to completely recite it. What was going on this time? Was he bewitched? He originally thought that if he couldn't recite it, he would reprimand him, warning him to study hard and not to only think about playing and eating all day. He didn't expect the naughty brat to perform so well. The reprimand that he had prepared immediately became useless. His good plan was interrupted and housekeeper Wang's face became serious again. He casually pulled over a piece of white paper, picked up a pen and wrote a few lines on it. He handed it to the naughty brat and said, "There is no end to learning. Don't be arrogant and complacent. Go and memorize these lines. I'll check them at night." A few days ago when they were on the mountain, the female teacher made the group of children recite these lines. Housekeeper Wang's ears almost grew calluses from listening to them that day, so he inadvertently memorized those lines. At this time he could use these lines to send the naughty brat away. At least before he could memorize them he wouldn't bother him. "Go, go." Housekeeper Wang waved his hand and said impatiently. The naughty brat took the paper and walked out of the room in a daze. His 10-year-old brain still couldn't completely understand why he didn't receive a reward when he had clearly memorized them, but a punishment for continuing to memorize. The naughty brat, who had been tricked by his father, sat under the eaves of the side room with a lifeless expression. He raised his head and looked at the sky, revealing an expression of despair. After a long time, the naughty brat let out a long sigh and raised the paper in his hand. Having attended a private school for a few years, he could already recognize quite a few words. Soon a voice sounded from under the eaves. "The rules of a disciple, the teachings of a saint, are first filial piety, then trustworthiness. Love the masses, be close to the people, and if you have the strength to spare, learn literature." Sigh. The voice was clear and lively like a child's, yet it was mixed with sighs. It was a bit out of place with the atmosphere at this time. At the same time, a middle-aged man with a dignified expression walked out of Prince Ning's study. He rubbed the space between his brows. The cold autumn wind blew past and it actually made him much more clear-headed. "Sir Prefect, shall I escort you back?" An old man wearing the robes of a housekeeper walked over and said respectfully. The middle-aged man waved his hand and said, "There's no need. I know the roads in the manor. You can walk back yourself." Hearing this, the old man didn't insist. He watched the middle-aged man's figure disappear before turning to leave. At this time, the middle-aged man walking in the manor had a worried expression on his face. As the prefect of Qing and Fu, he was in charge of all matters in the manor. In another 2 months he would return to the capital to report on his duties. At that time, the court would conduct an examination of his achievements, including this year's situation with regards to Qing and Fu's population, land clearing, tax collection, food, public security, education, and other aspects. He would be promoted, punished, and rewarded accordingly. He wasn't worried about farming and collecting taxes, but he was worried about the education of the people. The students of Qing and Fu had not performed well in this year's examinations. The number of imperial examinations they had received was far less than in previous years. This way, his achievements in education would be greatly reduced. But the work of education could not be accomplished in a day. Although improvements in other areas could completely cover up the lack of education, it was still somewhat embarrassing. After all, Qing and Fu was the largest city in the Jing kingdom other than the capital. The number of students was also second only to the capital. In previous years, the number of students who passed the examinations was enough to compete with the capital, but this time they were left far behind. As he was thinking about this matter, he suddenly heard a child's voice when he passed by a certain room. "The rules of the disciples, the teachings of the saints, the first is filial piety, the second is honesty. Sai. Love the masses, be close to the people, and have the strength to spare, learn literature. Tang Shuechio, Sai." Chapter 139. The rules of a disciple, the teachings of a saint, the first is filial piety, the second is trust. Tang Shuechio? The middle-aged man stopped walking and carefully listened to the contents of the child's recitation. A trace of doubt appeared on his face. These 3 sentences were easy to recite, and although the words were easy to understand if one listened carefully, it seemed to have the effect of enlightenment. It was very suitable for teaching children. There were similar teachings in the Mongolian language, but they were relatively obscure. It was rare to see such a simple and easy-to-understand one. Furthermore, he had never heard of the text that the child was reciting. Also, what was that Tang Xueqiu? After standing outside the courtyard and listening for a while, the child repeated the same few sentences. The middle-aged man had already thought of a few things. A trace of eagerness appeared on his face as he walked in with large strides. The devilish child held the paper in his hands and carried it back and forth. The only words he repeated were, Tang Xueqiu. He was drooling when he heard footsteps. When he raised his head, he saw a stranger walk into the courtyard. The devilish child looked at him in a daze and a trace of caution appeared on his face. Little child, what text did you recite just now? Magistrate Dong walked in front of the devilish child and asked in a pleasant manner. His father had said that the people living in the Wangfu were all nobles. He was to only play in this area and not to bump into others. He stared blankly at the stranger in front of him and didn't reply. He obediently handed over the paper in his hands. Magistrate Dong took the piece of paper from the naughty child's hands and discovered that there were only a few sentences written on it. After he finished reading the contents of the few lines, his eyes brightened and he asked somewhat urgently, "Do you know who wrote this?" Housekeeper Wang was still in the room checking the accounts when the door was pushed open again. He raised his head and saw the devilish child's head poking in again. When he lowered his head again, he suddenly forgot where he had been calculating. A trace of anger appeared on his face as he glared at the devilish child and said, "Did you memorize it all? If you didn't, be careful of your butt." At this time, a hand reached out from behind the devilish child and completely pushed open the door. A familiar-looking middle-aged man walked in from outside. Seeing that person, Housekeeper Wang was first stunned. Then he suddenly stood up from his seat, his face pale, and said with a trembling voice, "Magistrate Dong." At this moment he felt a lingering fear. Could it be that this little brat had offended Magistrate Dong, and he was here to punish him? Thinking of this, Shopkeeper Wang's legs suddenly felt weak and he almost collapsed on the chair again. "Let me ask you, this three-word rhyme was written by you. Is there anything else?" Magistrate Dong didn't have time to waste with him. He took the paper and walked in front of him. 3 words of rhyme? Housekeeper Wang stared blankly at the paper in Magistrate Dong's hand that he had just written to the naughty child. He then looked at Magistrate Dong's expression and his heart slightly relaxed. As long as he wasn't here to denounce him. Thinking of this, he immediately changed his expression and explained with an apologetic smile. "I didn't expect such a capable person to exist in such a small mountain village." After listening, Magistrate Dong stroked the short beard on his chin and praised. With his knowledge, he could naturally see the meaning behind these few short sentences. This was clearly a Mongolian text to teach children to learn etiquette. Without etiquette, one would not be able to stand. From a young age, teaching them to develop a kind and honest nature, teaching them to be virtuous, to guard against evil, and to be sincere was also beneficial in developing good family and academic values. If this text could be carried out, it would definitely be a great contribution to education. It would be a good deed that would last for thousands of years. Not only would the difficult problem he was facing be easily solved, if he really made some achievements, there might even be a slight possibility of leaving his name in history, as an official who didn't want to leave a thick stroke in the history books. Just based on other political achievements, to achieve this was tantamount to reaching the heavens. But the merit of education could influence future generations. Thinking of this, even with his temperament, he couldn't help but feel a surge of emotions. "Do you know the entire text?" Magistrate Dong looked at Housekeeper Wang with sparkling eyes and asked. At this moment he desperately wanted to know if this text was as he imagined it to be, an excellent piece of teaching Mongolian so that he wouldn't rejoice for nothing. "Sir, I only heard about a dozen sentences that day. I don't know if there is the entire text," Housekeeper Wang replied honestly. Magistrate Dong looked at him and thought for a moment before saying, "Send someone to ask the village teacher again. If there really is it, you must bring the entire text back and send it to the yamen." The housekeeper of the Wangfu could be considered a top figure outside, but in front of Qing and magistrate he could only nod and say yes. In order to show the importance he placed on this matter, the moment Magistrate Dong's foot left, Housekeeper Wang hurriedly left the Wangfu. He ordered the servant to drive the carriage faster and try to finish this matter in the shortest amount of time possible. Outside the school in Willow Leaf Village, Qing once again saw housekeeper Wang. When she found out that he had not come to find her brother-in-law, but to find her, she was slightly surprised. She had some impression of housekeeper Wang. She only knew that he seemed to be her brother-in-law's friend. A few days ago she had seen the two of them talking by the stream. She did not slight him, but after hearing the purpose of his visit, she was slightly surprised. What you were talking about just now, was it this rules for a disciple ? Qing returned to the school and took out a thin book that she had personally written. She handed it to housekeeper Wang. Housekeeper Wang quickly took it. After flipping it open, he saw that the first few sentences were exactly the same as what he had heard that day. He flipped a few more pages and saw that there were hundreds of sentences behind. Only then did he realize that what he had heard that day was just a few paragraphs. He was overjoyed. Now he could finally report to Magistrate Dong. I wonder if you could give me a copy of the original rules for a disciple ? He looked at Qing and asked urgently. Hearing this, Qing hesitated slightly and said, "This rules for a disciple was not written by me. I will have to ask before I can give you an answer." "It was not written by you?" Housekeeper Wang's expression froze. Qing nodded and gave him a brief explanation. "It's actually him." Housekeeper Wang murmured a few words. He didn't expect that this article was written by that mean scholar. He was slightly surprised for a while, then smiled and said, "To tell you the truth, I was ordered by Prefectural Magistrate Dong to retrieve the original text of rules for disciples." Prefectural Magistrate Dong was very pleased with this article. "This is a great thing for young Master Li." Magistrate Dong. Hearing this, Qing covered her small mouth in surprise and couldn't help but exclaim. For someone like her who had lived here since she was young and rarely left the village, the Anxi County Magistrate was already a high position. Any higher would be an unimaginable level for her. Chapter 140. Good. What a good disciple rules! Prefectural Magistrate Dong flipped through the thin book in his hands and the worry on his face disappeared. After reading the entire disciple rules, he couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. Disciple rules. A person standing quietly in the hall raised his head and looked at Prefectural Magistrate Dong with a confused expression. He didn't know what made Magistrate Dong so happy, and what was this disciple rules? "Professor Feng, take a look at this disciple rules as well." Seeing the confusion of the person in the hall, Prefectural Magistrate Dong closed the book and handed it over. The man called Professor Feng accepted the book with both hands, his heart full of suspicion. When he looked at it, he saw the beautiful 3 small words on the cover: Disciple Rules. He raised his head and glanced at Prefectural Magistrate Dong before flipping to the first page. There were only a few thousand words, but Professor Feng read very slowly. Gradually, his expression changed from calm to excited. "Magistrate Dong, this disciple rules, who wrote it?" Professor Feng raised his head to look at Prefectural Magistrate Dong, his expression shocked. "These 3 words are simple and easy to understand. They promote filial piety, honesty, benevolence, and observance of propriety. It is truly an excellent work for enlightening and educating the disciples." As a prefectural school professor and the head of the prefectural scholars, his responsibility was to educate and instruct. Speaking of which, he understood the meaning of this disciple rules, even more than Prefectural Magistrate Dong. "Congratulations, Magistrate. With this disciple rules, you no longer need to worry about educating." Professor Feng quickly understood the crux of the matter and saluted Prefectural Magistrate Dong with his fists. Of course, he understood the difficulties Prefectural Magistrate Dong faced. If he presented this disciple rules, he could make up for the lack of educating this year. "I heard that this article was written by a scholar in the prefecture. I owe it all to him." Prefectural Magistrate Dong was clearly in a good mood and no longer had the troubled expression from before. When the steward of the mansion had delivered the article, he had already told him that this disciple rules was not written by the female teacher. It was written by a young man named Li Yi. Prefectural Magistrate Dong immediately sent someone to investigate the scholar's background. Of course, the most important thing was to confirm whether or not he was from Qingyanfu. If the rules for disciples had already appeared elsewhere, then wouldn't he have been happy for nothing? Fortunately, Li Yi did not disappoint him. He had the title of Xianxia and was a member of Qing and prefecture under his rule. Prefectural Magistrate Dong had already memorized this name. If he were to become a high scholar in the future, he could take care of him and recommend him to the Ministry of Appointments so that he could fill the vacancy. It's all thanks to Sir's guidance. Professor Feng flattered him at the right time. If this rules for disciples could be implemented, then the credit of educating would definitely fall onto Magistrate Dong's head. Magistrate Dong seemed to have thought of something. He shook his head and said, "It's just that the elementary scholar named Li Yi doesn't seem to want to improve himself. He doesn't focus on his studies and wants to become a high scholar as soon as possible. Instead, he opens a shop in the city. A good scholar doesn't want to be a businessman. If I hadn't sent someone to verify this, I wouldn't have believed that he was the one who wrote the rules for disciples." Li? Professor Feng paused and asked, "Is it the Li Yi who wrote Immortal Magpie Bridge and Shuidiao Getu?" Professor Feng also knows this person? Prefectural Magistrate Dong raised his eyebrows and asked. "The Li Yi I know is the one who wrote Immortal Magpie Bridge and Shuidiao Getu. Li Yi is unparalleled in poetry and was called the #1 scholar of the Jing Kingdom by the Secretary of Education. I don't know if it's the same person that Sir is talking about," Professor Feng said after some thought. "Shuidiao Getu? The poem that was circulated during the Mid-Autumn Poetry Meet?" Prefectural Magistrate Dong furrowed his eyebrows. In his opinion, poetry was just a small path and had no use in governing a country. It was all leftovers from their playtime. As for the Mid-Autumn Poetry Meet, he only went through the motions and didn't pay much attention to it. Later he only heard about Shuidiao Getu from the daughter of the manor. As for who wrote the poem, he wasn't too sure. If it is really as Sir says, then this kind of scholar who doesn't know how to improve should be given a beating. If we can get him to return to the right path, perhaps he will be another good talent in the future. Professor Feng heard this and said with a frown. As a prefectural professor, what he did the most was to teach and guide the students of the prefectural school. Who knew how many stubborn and mischievous students had walked the right path under his guidance? I didn't think that the teacher would have such an evaluation of him. I am even more curious about this person. A look of interest appeared on Prefectural Magistrate Dong's face as he stroked the short beard on his chin. These few days the young masters and misses of Qing and Prefectural City had many complaints about the Rui workshop. Since a few days ago this shop had stopped selling Rui Du. They could only rely on previous orders to get the goods. This caused many people who didn't have the time to buy to feel regret. In the present Qing and Prefectural City, Rui Du had clearly become the leading fashion trend. Young ladies, scholars and scholars all fought to buy it. The sudden cessation of sales created a significant impact in these high society circles. However, just as they couldn't hold it in any longer and planned to go to the Rui workshop to ask the reason, in the span of a night, many shops selling Rui Du suddenly appeared in the prefectural city. At first people were skeptical. After all, there had only been one shop selling the Rui Du in the past few days. It was said that many people who wanted to buy the recipe of the Rui Du were all rejected. How could so many shops suddenly appear? Of course, an extremely small number of people didn't have any suspicions. Behind these shops was Ning Wangfu. How could there be a problem with what they were selling? Of course, most people's suspicions were completely dispelled after they personally went to the Rui workshop to ask. The shopkeeper of the Rui workshop personally admitted that what the shops were selling was genuine Rui Du. In other words, from now on, there would no longer be a situation where Rui Du was out of stock and people couldn't buy it even if they wanted to. After the suspicions disappeared, a new wave of panic buying immediately erupted in the prefectural city. Countless people rushed to the newly opened shops. The workers in the shops couldn't keep up. They even had to temporarily transfer some people from other places to stabilize the situation. When shopkeeper Wang heard this news, his initial shock turned to disbelief. In the blink of an eye, he became ecstatic. His heart that had been hanging in the air finally relaxed. The popularity of the Rui Du far exceeded his expectations. At this rate, in just a few days he would be able to recoup all the capital he had invested. If this situation could continue in 2 months, not only would he be able to make up for the shortfall, the income of the Wangfu would definitely exceed that of previous years. The business of hard liquor was still in preparation. There was also the perfume and soap that the scholar had mentioned. If the profits from these businesses could be like the Ruidu, just thinking about it made housekeeper Wang's blood boil. His little prince had finally done something reliable. Chapter 141. Have you heard? Other than the Rui workshop, a few more shops in the city have started selling Ruidu. How come I didn't know? Is the news true? It's true. Today a few more shops in the city have Ruidu on sale. Before I came I saw someone buy it. Let's hurry to that shop. If we're late we'll have to wait a few more days. Seeing a few scholarly-looking youths pass by them and rush in a certain direction, a middle-aged man wearing an ordinary Confucian robe said with some confusion, "These days there's an item called Ruidu. It's all the rage in the prefectural city, especially among the socialites. Why are these men rushing like ducks for it?" Another person beside him said, Magistrate, you may not know this, but this Rui nectar is highly regarded among the students. By smearing it on one's body, it can relieve fatigue, refresh one's mind, and increase one's spirit by 100 times. When a student is tired from studying, just a few drops would be enough for them to continue studying. These two people dressed in plain clothes walking slowly on the street were Magistrate Dong and Professor Feng. Because of the rules for disciples, they were very curious about the elementary scholar named Li Yi. They wanted to see for themselves what kind of person was able to write such a piece of Mongolian literature, and what kind of person he was. Of course, other than this reason, they also wanted to use this opportunity to teach him to turn over a new leaf and diligently seek scholarly honors. If he really did succeed in the future, the magistrate and the professor would personally come to reprimand him, causing him to suddenly come to his senses and devote himself to studying. This would become a legend. If that's the case, then he has benefited the students of Qingyan Prefecture, Magistrate Dong said with some surprise. He was not unfamiliar with this Ruidu. These days the women in the family often use this item. The mistress had even mentioned to him that this item was being fought over by many socialites. If she hadn't sent a servant girl to buy dozens of bottles, she probably wouldn't have been able to buy it. However, this was the first time he knew that this Ruidu had such an effect. If he could help these students and make them study more diligently, it would be a great contribution. Professor Feng nodded and said, "Yes, in the prefectural school, there are already many students who have responded that this item is indeed very useful for studying. I am thinking of purchasing a batch to see if it can be popularized." Yesterday, after Prefectural Magistrate Dong had asked to see the scholar named Li Yi, he had done some research. Only then did he discover that the author of Rules for Disciples was the person the Minister of Education called the #1 scholar in the Jing Kingdom. At the same time, he was also the shopkeeper of the Rui workshop in Qingyan Prefecture. The popular Rui nectar in the prefectural city was also made by him. Although this item is good, but Prefectural Magistrate Dong changed the topic and said, but as a scholar he should focus his efforts on obtaining scholarly honors. This person has such talent, we really shouldn't waste it. Professor Feng hurriedly said, Prefectural Magistrate Dong is right. Since he can write a teaching article like Rules for Disciples, he must have a unique understanding of teaching. Why don't we let him be a scholar in the district school? This way he won't delay his examination and he can also contribute to the teaching of the prefectural school. That would be good. Prefectural Magistrate Dong nodded and agreed deeply. At this time Professor Feng pointed ahead and said, Sir, we are about to reach the Rui workshop. A moment later, at the entrance of the Rui workshop, Prefectural Magistrate Dong raised his head to look at the signboard that said Rui workshop. He couldn't help but exclaim, good calligraphy. No wonder the Minister of Education has such a high opinion of him. Just based on this calligraphy, I'm afraid there aren't many people in this world who can compare. Professor Feng was also secretly amazed. After a long time his gaze finally moved away from the signboard. He turned his head and said, Sir, please. As the saying goes, if you want to capture a woman's heart, you must first capture her stomach. Li Yi felt that he was very close to this goal. After his previous warm invitations, the female constable named Emingzu would always ask for a glass of wine when she passed by the shop while patrolling the streets. If it was mealtime, she would sometimes sit down and freeload a meal. This kind of unconventional and forthright personality didn't seem like someone from the royal family. She was more like someone from the pugilistic world. Li Yi would occasionally wonder if she was really a princess or a princess. However, looking at Li Xian, he knew that the members of the royal family of the Jing kingdom were all special. At least they were very close to the people. After all, since ancient times he had never heard of any princess or princess taking being a constable as their profession. Regardless of whether she was experiencing this kind of life on a whim from an outsider's point of view, at least she was very responsible. This also made Li Yi look at her in a new light. With such a loyal constable who abhorred evil, he would come to the store whenever he had nothing to do. Who would be stupid enough to cause trouble here? As Li Yi was thinking about this, two figures walked into the shop. Although Magistrate Dong was wearing plain clothes today and not his official robes, he had been in a high position for a long time. He naturally had the aura of a superior. After all, he was going to teach that scholar a lesson. His expression was slightly serious, but he didn't show any anger. Looking into the hall, the first person he saw was not the scholar, but a beautiful woman wearing a light blue constable's uniform. When Magistrate Dong entered, the woman happened to raise her head to look at him. The moment he saw the woman, Magistrate Dong stopped in his tracks. His body trembled and the dignified expression on his face disappeared. His expression became serious and he was about to speak when the woman waved her hand casually. Magistrate Dong's words were immediately stuck in his throat. Professor Feng did not recognize the woman. After entering, he wore the serious expression that he usually wore in front of students. He walked to the side of the only young man in the hall and asked, "You are Li Yi?" Li Yi's face showed a look of shock. No way, someone really came to cause trouble? This person showed a grim face the moment he entered and named him by name. One look and he knew that this person did not come with good intentions. He turned his head to look at Immingzu and blinked. As a constable, this person came to bully you right in front of your face and you don't care? Immingzu took a sip of wine. The expression on her pretty face did not change. Seeing that Li Yi did not answer, Professor Feng thought that he had frightened him and continued to ask, "That disciple rules, was it your creation?" Disciple rules? Li Yi finally understood that the other person was not here to cause trouble. Yesterday, Qing had told him that the magistrate had sent someone to take away the disciple rules that he had modified. At that time, Li Yi had been a little surprised. The only people who knew about the disciple rules were him, Qing, and those naughty children. How did the magistrate know about it? But now was not the time to think about this. The magistrate was a very high position. The magistrate of Qing Prefecture was almost equivalent to the mayor of a municipality in the future. The rank was very high and Li Yi did not dare to slight him. He immediately stood up. "Welcome, Lord Prefectural Magistrate. Please take a seat, please take a seat." He did not know how to greet such a high official, so he hurriedly said this based on the little impression he had seen in the television series. Li Yi's action shocked Professor Feng. The serious expression on his face immediately disappeared. The magistrate was right beside him. Even if he had a few more guts, he would not dare to sit. Chapter 142. Professor Feng was choked by Li Yi's words. He coughed dryly and said awkwardly, "Ahem, don't talk nonsense. I am the prefectural school professor of Qing Prefecture. Call me a beast?" Li Yi looked at the middle-aged man in front of him with some surprise. His first thought was that he was actually a university professor in the future. He then realized that professor seemed to be an official position here, mainly responsible for the education of a prefecture. The prefectural school professor of Qing Prefecture was almost equivalent to the director of the city's education bureau in the future. However, he didn't plan on taking the imperial examinations. Even if he was the director of the education bureau, he wouldn't be able to control him, much less the director of the education bureau. Since he wasn't the prefectural magistrate, Li Yi didn't need to be so careful. However, he still had the necessary etiquette. After all, he still had the identity of a scholar. He bowed respectfully and said, "Sir, the rules of a disciple was written by me." Shamelessly claiming the fruits of someone else's labor as his own, he blushed slightly. Professor Feng nodded slightly. The young man in front of him looked talented. Looking at his words and actions, he seemed to be a person who knew how to behave. His first impression of him was not bad. However, thinking about it, to be able to write an essay like, "The Rules of a Disciple," his character would certainly not be bad. If he could be guided a little and get him on the right path, he might be able to achieve great things in the future. In layman's terms, he felt that Li Yi still needed to be saved. He nodded in satisfaction and then turned to look at Prefectural Magistrate Dong. After all, Prefectural Magistrate Dong was the main character today. There were some things that he shouldn't meddle in. Prefectural Magistrate Dong didn't seem to see his gaze. He looked around at the decorations in the shop. One moment he looked at the shelves, the next moment he looked at the paintings on the wall. He didn't seem to speak at all. Seeing this, Professor Feng was slightly taken aback. He wondered what was wrong with Prefectural Magistrate Dong. Didn't he say he would personally lecture him? Before he came, Prefectural Magistrate Dong had specifically told him not to reveal his identity and to just treat him as one of his tutors. However, Professor Feng didn't dare to treat him as a tutor. Seeing this, he didn't dare to remind him and could only do it himself. What Professor Feng didn't know was that Prefectural Magistrate Dong was still curious as to why Princess Yongle was here. What was her relationship with this scholar? Why would she speak so casually? Professor Feng looked at Li Yi and said in a deep voice, "The rhythm of this disciple rules is easy to read and the content is simple. It preaches the way of the sage. I have discussed with the Prefectural Magistrate, and we wish to use it as an introductory book to spread throughout the prefecture. Are you willing?" Li Yi was not surprised by Professor Feng's words. Yesterday, when Qin Qing told him about this matter, Li Yi had already prepared himself for someone to come looking for him. After such a long time, he had more or less figured out the situation of this world. When he first read the annals of the Jing Kingdom, he was completely clueless about the history of the Jing Kingdom. However, when he went back further, he could find some familiar traces. Xia, Shang, Zhou, Qin, Chu, Han, three kingdoms, Wei, Jin, and northern and southern dynasties were all there. The general direction remained the same, but when Li Yi compared more specific details, characters, or some minor events with the history books in the library, he found that there were still some discrepancies. The wheel of history officially began to deviate and diverge, probably during the Sui and Tang dynasties. The country named Tang ended the chaotic times at the end of the Sui dynasty. However, not long after the country was founded, it welcomed a major split, forming a regime similar to the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms. The Jing Kingdom was established at that time, and it had been 50 to 60 years since then. There was no 3-character classic or 1,000-character classic in this world. Although there were other introductory books to replace them, they were relatively obscure and not suitable for children to learn. They were far from being as easy to understand as the disciple rules. The disciple rules still had a lot of controversy in later generations. Some people said that it promoted foolish teachings, and was only suitable for the ancient feudal society. Both sides expressed their own views and the controversy was not small. However, in the current Jing Kingdom, where Confucianism was still the mainstream, no one dared to say that the disciple rules promoted foolish teachings. The father was the ruler of the sons and the monarch was the ruler of the ministers. Daring to say that this was a feudal way of thinking, did you want to rebel? With such a big label on your head, even the most powerful person would be crushed to death. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, Li Yi looked at Professor Feng, cupped his fists and said, "Everything is up to you, Your Excellency." This professor had already discussed with the prefectural magistrate, and he still came to ask for his opinion. Wasn't this too much? If he really felt that it was not good to take something from someone else for free, he could just give him a few thousand taels of silver. You are worth teaching. Professor Feng was even more satisfied. He thought to himself that this elementary scholar was not like what he had thought. He looked like a promising talent. As Emmingzi listened to the conversation between the two of them, she could not help but feel a trace of happiness in her heart. What was this disciple's rules? It actually made Prefectural Magistrate Dong and the Prefectural School professor come to visit at the same time. Could it be that this scholar had some abilities that she did not know of? As she thought of this, when she looked at Li Yi again, a strange look appeared in her eyes. As for Prefectural Magistrate Dong, he had already completely become a qualified follower. He stood behind Professor Feng without saying a word. Most of his attention was on Emmingzi. Since you have such talent, why don't you think of improving yourself and take the imperial examinations to serve the country? As a scholar, you actually chose to walk such a lowly path. Have all these years of reading by the sages been in vain? After asking Li Yi symbolically and going through the process once, the next thing to do was to get to the main point. Professor Feng's face was stern as he looked at him and said this sternly. His voice also raised a few pitches. This was also the way he usually reprimanded his students. Li was shocked. He did not expect this guy to change his attitude so quickly. Just a moment ago he was talking to him in a friendly manner and the next moment he turned into a coffin face. Li Yi did not react for a moment and stood there in a daze. His expression fell into Professor Feng's eyes. Naturally, he was ashamed of his words and was on the verge of repentance. Professor Feng's expression softened as he looked at him and said, "Since you have done a good job in educating the prefectural school, I can make an exception and allow you to become a scholar in the county school. It will not affect your studies and will also be of great help to you in the future when you take the imperial examinations. First knock him unconscious with a stick, then feed him a sweet date." Professor Feng had been in charge of the prefectural school for so many years and had long since perfected this method. He raised his head slightly and looked at the scholar in front of him, waiting for the moment when he would be deeply grateful to him. Although the rank of a county school official was not high, it was still an official. A high scholar might not care about it, but it was a position that many elementary scholars would fight to get. If he was lucky enough to become a high scholar in the future, he might be directly promoted to a teacher and would not have to wait for the Ministry of Appointments to appoint him. Scholar. After Li Yi reacted, his expression immediately changed. Not long ago he had rejected the position of the school teacher and now someone wanted him to become a scholar. He was completely uninterested in this. If he really became a scholar, he would be under the control of others. He would no longer be able to lie comfortably in the courtyard and bask in the sun. He would also not be able to do things as he pleased. He would probably only be able to earn a few taels of silver a month. He might as well sell a bottle of rui. In just a moment, Li Yi rejected this suggestion. "Why, you are not willing?" Professor Feng looked at him and asked with a frown. "It's not that I am not willing." Li Yi straightened his body and bowed to Professor Feng. With a troubled expression he said, "It's just that I have had a chronic illness since I was young. Every time I think about taking the imperial examinations and becoming an official, I would be bedridden. I had no choice but to give up on the imperial examinations and become a businessman. Your Excellency, I am very grateful for your kindness. However, because I was born with a chronic illness, I can only thank you for your kindness." Professor Feng was stunned. What kind of chronic illness was this? In this world, was there an illness that prevented one from becoming an official? Chapter 143. Naturally, Professor Feng did not know what terminal laziness cancer meant. None of the students he taught had ever talked nonsense to him with such a straight face. He was still suspicious. Could this really be a strange illness that he had never heard of before? An illness that prevents one from becoming an official? Emingzu had a strange look in her eyes. As for Magistrate Dong, who had been standing silently at the side, his face began to darken. This scholar clearly had no interest in fame and did not want to become a mere academic official. He made up this chronic illness that prevents one from becoming an official to fool Professor Feng, and Professor Feng actually believed it. If Princess Yongla was not present at this moment, Magistrate Dong would have reprimanded this unambitious and self-deprecating student. If everyone was as lazy as him, how could the country recruit talents? Forget it, forget it. Since you have an illness, then rest well. We'll talk about this later. Professor Feng shook his head and sighed. In the prefectural school, there were many students who participated in the imperial examinations. After failing many times, they became absent-minded and eventually went crazy. There were also people who suffered from the shock of failing for a long time and fell ill. Whenever they picked up a book, they would have a splitting headache. Professor Feng had been an official for many years and had seen many such cases. He subconsciously categorized Li Yi as such a person. Fame was important, but it was not worth it to lose one's life for it. Hearing Professor Feng's words, Li Yi was slightly stunned. Did this lord really believe it? At this moment he couldn't help but feel a little guilty in his heart. Deceiving such an honest person really made him feel a little uneasy. I did not expect such a strange illness to exist in this world. This official is truly ignorant. After walking out of Fortune Square, Professor Feng let out a long sigh. There was a deep sense of regret in his tone. Do you really think that he was speaking the truth? Magistrate Dong looked at him with a strange expression. Magistrate Dong had to admit that aside from Princess Yongle, after this incident his impression of that scholar had become even deeper. Magistrate Dong, what do you mean? Professor Feng looked at him with a face full of confusion. A moment later, a man on the street suddenly flew into a rage and attracted the attention of many people. This brat, how dare he deceive me? Professor Feng was seething with anger. He had been in charge of the school for so many years, and when the students saw him, they were all respectful and courteous. When had he ever met such a stubborn person? At this moment Professor Feng's heart was filled with doubt. Was the rules for disciples really written by him? As a dignified professor of the Imperial College, he had actually been fooled by an elementary scholar. This was a great humiliation to him. Professor Feng's face was filled with anger. He rolled up his sleeves and was about to leave when he said angrily, "Humph, I have seen many people like him. Even if he is a rotten piece of wood, I will make him repent." Over the years he had taught countless students, but he had also encountered quite a few stubborn people. Professor Feng had developed an obsession with Li Yi. Magistrate Dong shook his head and pulled him back in time. Forget it, forget it. I'm afraid he doesn't care about fame at all. No matter what we say, it's just playing the lute to a cow. Since Professor Feng did not want to be a scholar, they could not force him. Furthermore, there was the princess in the shop, so they could not let Professor Feng meddle. Professor Feng did not know her identity. If he said something wrong and offended the princess, it would not be good. Just as Professor Feng's heart was filled with anger, but he could not go against Magistrate Dong's wishes. Inside the shop, Li Yi was sitting lazily on a chair with his legs crossed. He sipped on his tea and looked extremely relaxed. Why do you not want to be a scholar? Emingzu hugged her saber in front of her chest and looked at him with interest. Ever since the imperial examination system was established, countless students studied hard. Wasn't it so that one day they could pass the imperial examinations and fight for a position in the government? It was rare to see a scholar who did not want to be an official. Li Yi pursed his lips and swallowed a mouthful of tea. He said, "What's so good about being a lowly scholar? There's no rank and you're ordered around all day, it's boring. If you want to be an official, you should at least be a county magistrate. At the very least you should be a county lieutenant. What's the point of being a scholar? If you want to have a foothold in this world and not be bullied, you have to know how to hug someone's thigh. But rather than hugging someone else's thigh, it's better to be someone's thigh yourself." There was no need to be a high-ranking official. Even if it was a small county magistrate, at least he would not be bullied. As for being a scholar, he had never considered it. A county magistrate is directly appointed by the emperor. It's a 7th-ranked official position. If you want to be a county magistrate, why don't you try your best to pass the imperial examinations? Even the 8th-ranked county lieutenants have passed the imperial examinations. You're just a small elementary scholar. You don't even have the qualifications to register with the Ministry of Personnel. Naturally, you won't be able to become a county magistrate. Emingzi looked at him and said calmly. This time Li Yi did not speak. He was just saying it casually. With his lazy personality, if he were to really be in charge, he would only find it interesting in the beginning. After a long time he would definitely be bored. Let's go. The female constable did not pursue the matter. She finished the small jar of wine and tossed out these 2 words lightly. Then she continued to patrol the streets. County lieutenant. The moment she stepped out of the main door, the corner of her mouth curved slightly. In an instant it disappeared without a trace. In the prefectural yamen, prefectural magistrate Dong, who had just returned to his manor, carefully read the memorial he had already written a few times. After checking that there were no mistakes, he quickly sent it out. Based on the distance between Qing'an Prefecture and the capital, it would take 2 days if it was fast, 3 if it was slow. This memorial would be presented to the emperor's desk. Teaching was no small matter. Although as the prefectural magistrate he could make all the decisions in the prefecture. If he really wanted to implement the rules for disciples in Qing'an Prefecture, he had to first get the emperor's approval. Of course, before he wrote this memorial, he already knew that this matter was just going through the motions. The rules for disciples was indeed very beneficial for children. The emperor was not a pedantic person. If there were no accidents, in a few days there would be good news from the capital. At the same time, on the other side of the prefectural city, the female constable walked into an exquisite courtyard. A female official came to greet her from afar. Princess. Not long after, someone walked out of the courtyard and delivered a letter to the relay station. Although the shop in the prince's manor had already opened because of the shortage a few days ago, the supply of rui nectar could not meet the demand. Just after noon, the rui nectar in the shop was sold out again. It was a bit boring to stay in the shop. A few girls were left to look after the shop. Of course, Fong had to stay as well. Li slowly walked out of the shop alone. Son-in-law, where are you going? Fong raised his head and asked. Back to the stronghold to eat hot pot. He lazily replied and walked in the direction of the car dealership. Hot pot. Fong paused for a moment and wiped away his saliva. Although he didn't know what this hot pot was, every time the son-in-law mentioned the word eat, he couldn't help but salivate. Chapter 144. The charcoal fire was burning brightly under the stove and steam was bubbling out of the pot. Li Yi put the thinly sliced mutton into the pot. After it was scalded by the soup, it quickly flipped over. Just as he was about to reach out his chopsticks to pick it up, a shadow suddenly flashed before his eyes and snatched away the mutton that he had just placed in the pot. Li Yi glanced at Lu Rui. In terms of hand speed, he was still not comparable to Mississippi Lu. Seeing that she was the one who cut the mutton today, he would not argue with her over such a small matter. He picked up another piece of mutton that was as thin as a piece of paper and dipped it in the seasoning bowl that he had prepared beforehand. It melted in his mouth. To be able to cut the mutton into such thin pieces, Mississippi Lu's knife skills were indeed worthy of her reputation. Of course, hot pot could not be eaten without spicy food. He did not find a place that sold chili in the market, but fortunately there were all kinds of seasonings here, so he found a substitute. Although the spiciness was still not comparable to chili, he could only make do with it. Xiaohuan, add some tofu. Oh right, add some vegetables too, and also mushrooms, carrots. Li Yi instructed the maidservant while taking a sip of fruit wine. Although eating hot pot in autumn was not as enjoyable as eating in winter, Li Yi, who had been itching for it for a long time, could not wait that long. Husband, eat slowly. No one is going to fight with you. Lu Rui said in amusement as she watched Li Yi pick up a piece of tofu from the pot and put it into his mouth. He was so hot that he sucked in air and did not want to spit it out. Why is no one fighting with you? Li Yi glanced at Mississippi Lu, who was sitting opposite him. His hands did not stop moving and he scooped up the mutton that he had just placed in the pot. It would be winter in 2 months and there would be many opportunities to eat hot pot in the future. It was necessary to instill in Mississippi Lu the etiquette of eating hot pot. It was very impolite to take away something that was deliberately placed in the pot. Eating hot pot was actually about the atmosphere. The whole family gathered around the small stove and chatted while eating. The young maidservant had not been with Li Yi recently. It was not easy for her to have a chance. Once she opened her mouth, she could not close it again. Fong came over because of the smell. As soon as he pushed the door open, he couldn't help but swallow his saliva. His eyes were glued to the hot pot in the middle of the room. Fong is here. Xiaohuan, go add a pair of chopsticks for Uncle Fong, Li Yi said to Xiaohuan. How can I accept this? Fong's face revealed his signature silly smile again. With a face full of embarrassment, he moved a small chair and sat beside Li Yi, waiting for Xiaohuan to bring him a pair of chopsticks. After fishing in the pot, nothing came out. His smile froze on his face. Oh, I'm sorry, the dishes are all gone. If only you had come earlier. Li Yi looked up at Fong and asked tentatively, would you like to drink some soup? There was still a bit of mutton left and the dishes were not finished. Seeing Li Yi add soup into the pot, and the meat and vegetables were all in the pot, Fong's face revealed a happy expression again. While waiting for the dishes to be cooked, Fong took out a translucent object from his bosom and handed it to Li Yi, saying, Son-in-law, the soap you mentioned last time seems to be done. Take a look and see if it works. Looking at the square object in Fong's hand, Li Yi's eyes couldn't help but light up. In this era where the poor commonly used honey locust beans to bathe, to have a piece of soap was a very happy thing. Some time ago, Fong bought some alkaline flour and lime, and used saponification to make a batch of soap. The cold-made soap needed nearly a month to mature before it could be used. During this time, Li Yi was busy with Rui's due, so he asked Fong to count the days and inform him when the time was right. Having just finished eating the hot pot, it was inevitable that his hands were a little greasy. He couldn't wait to get some water, and after rubbing the soap in the water, a layer of rich foam appeared on his hands. This was the advantage of handmade soap. There was a lot of foam, strong decontamination ability, and at the same time, it had an amazing cleaning ability without causing any damage to the skin. When Li Yi made the first batch of soap, he didn't add any messy things in it. Although it didn't look good, it was very practical. After rubbing the foam on his hands for a while and then rinsing it with water, there was no longer any greasy feeling on his hands. Son-in-law, what is this? Xiao Huan blinked her curious eyes and looked at the soap in Li Yi's hands. She was very curious about this thing that could produce foam. And this is called soap. It's used to wash your hands and bathe. It's much better than bath beans. So it's pancreas. The servant girl nodded as if she understood. What pancreas? Can pancreas be compared to my soap? Li Yi pinched her little face and said, I just finished eating the hot pot. There's a smell on my body. Go and take a bath. Xiao Huan doesn't have a smell. The servant girl stretched out her sleeve and smelled it. She muttered and ran to the kitchen to boil water. When Li Yi turned around, he found that Mississippi Lu was playing with bubbles. She seemed to be very interested in the soap. Li Yi's first piece of soap was mercilessly confiscated by her. She would bathe every day after she came back from cultivation. This soap was obviously better than bath beans. Seeing that he couldn't beat her, Li Yi didn't argue with her. The first batch of soap was about 10 pieces. He kept some at home and gave the rest to Fong and the others to divide. The soap he made didn't add any chemical stabilizers, preservatives. Of course, even if Li Yi wanted to, he didn't add any. Under normal circumstances, it could only be used for about a year. According to the tutorial in the book, he actually made it in one go. Next, he would make some in small batches, improve the process and add some essential oils and spices to it. Then it would be the real soap. As for the current product, it could only be called soap. If he added some sulfur, it would be sulfur soap. It had a certain effect of killing germs and pests and could prevent diseases. In this era where hygiene awareness was still very low, it had a higher practical value. Rui soap had been retired for a long time. It was time to introduce a new product. This time, Li Yi planned to take the low-end and high-end routes. The ordinary soap would be sold at a lower price, and the scented soap would be slightly more expensive, going the route of the aristocracy. Of course, the fragrance could also be customized, but the price would be higher. Covering both the low-end and high-end markets, the profits would probably be higher than Rui soap. However, because the production period was too long, it would probably be next year before the soap could be officially sold. With the help of the other shops, the business of Rui soap gradually decreased after 2 days. There were a few girls and Fong in the shop to take care of it, so he didn't need to worry. He hadn't left the mountain for 2 days. When he had nothing to do, he practiced martial arts, told a few adapted fairy tales to the little maidservants, or found some interesting books in the library to recharge himself. His days were very leisurely. It was late at night and the Willow Leaf village was very quiet. Hundreds of miles away in the imperial palace of Jingdu, in a magnificent palace, it was also quiet. Chapter 145. Occasionally, the sound of paper flipping could be heard in the frighteningly quiet main hall, interspersed with a few light coughs. Right now, the most powerful person in the Jing kingdom was putting down a memorial that had been sent from the northern border. His dignified face showed signs of fatigue. The disaster year has just passed. The flood in the south is beginning to appear. The problem of banditry in the northwest is still unresolved. The Qi kingdom is ready to make trouble and wants to invade the border of the Jing kingdom. Am I really not a good emperor? Why does God want the people of the Jing kingdom to suffer so much? After reading several memorials in succession, all of them were worrying matters. The man muttered a few words. For a moment he didn't know whether he should continue reading or not. At this moment the door of the palace opened quietly. A stooped figure walked in silently. It was an old man with a face full of wrinkles. His face was white and beardless. He wore an ordinary gray robe. He walked up the steps and stood in front of the wide table. He said in a low voice, "Your Majesty, concubine Yen has returned from a visit today. She is waiting outside the hall. There was a trace of femininity in the old voice, but no emotion could be heard. It is very late. Go tell her that if there is anything we can talk about it tomorrow. The man heard the words and waved his hand. At this time he was annoyed and did not want to see anyone. He did not even want to see his most beloved empress. Naturally he did not want to see concubine Yan. The old man nodded and quietly retreated. After a while he came back again and presented an item in his hand. He replied, "Your Majesty, concubine Yan has returned to the palace. She sent me to present this item to your Majesty. This item is called Ruidu. Concubine Yan brought it back from a visit. It is said that it has the effect of dispelling fatigue." Emperor Jing took the small porcelain bottle from his hand. When he was about to open it, the old man said again, "Your Majesty, the origin of this item is unknown. Should we let the Imperial Physician Bureau examine it first and then?" Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, "It does not matter. This is her kind intention. Besides, concubine Yan will not harm me. By the way, how should I use this item?" "Her Highness, concubine Yan, said that you can drip this on your hand," the old man said. He had personally tested it just now. When this thing was dripped on the body, it would indeed emit a strange smell. It could slightly stimulate one's spirit, and it could also be considered to have the effect of dispelling fatigue. Based on his decades of experience, this thing was not poison. Of course, if this thing needed to be taken to be effective, he would not let His Majesty take the risk, regardless of whether concubine Yan had good intentions or not. The man opened the lid of the porcelain bottle and a fragrant smell wafted out. When he heard that some students were using Ruidu to study, Li added a little more peppermint to the Ruidu. Since they wanted to be refreshed, he would let them be refreshed. He had not followed concubine Yan's instructions and dripped the thing on his hand, but he already felt a little clearer. A strange look flashed through Emperor Jing's eyes. He murmured, "This thing is strange. Concubine Yan's hometown is in Qing Prefecture, right? I will add this item to the tributes of Qing Prefecture and send a batch every month." Since it had the effect of dispelling fatigue, he put the porcelain bottle aside and reached for the next memorial. After opening it, he smiled and said, "What a coincidence. This memorial was sent by the prefectural magistrate of Qing. The memorial was very long with more than 1,000 words. He read it for a full quarter of an hour. After he finished reading, a trace of a smile finally appeared on his face. He said, "Rules for Disciples. It is really a superior Mongolian text. Such an article was actually written by a scholar. If those old fellows in the Directorate of Scholars read it, they would be so ashamed that they would not have the face to see anyone." He picked up his brush and wrote the word "approved." This meant that Prefectural Magistrate Dong wanted to implement this Mongolian text in Qing Prefecture, and he had approved it. Although compared to the things he was worried about, this was only a small matter, but it was still one of the few pieces of good news. It caused the haze in his heart to slightly dissipate. Of course, as for the name of the scholar, he only glanced at it and did not take it to heart. If this article was really implemented, then the scholar could be considered to have been enlightened. However, he was only a scholar and was not worthy of the emperor personally rewarding him. The local authorities would naturally do such things. Seeing that the man's mood seemed to have improved, the old eunuch's cold expression also softened. He took another step forward and said, "Your Majesty, Princess Yonghua has sent a letter." "Oh, Yonghua, that girl, you finally remembered her father?" A smile appeared on Emperor Jing's face. Hearing this news, all of his worries were thrown to the back of his mind. He said, "Where is the letter? Show it to me." The old eunuch took out a letter from his sleeve. No one knew how many things could be hidden in his sleeve. When he took it out the second time, he actually took out a small jar of wine. He said, "Your Majesty, this was also sent by someone from Princess Yonghua." Seeing this, Emperor Jing stilled slightly. He took the jar of wine. After opening it, a thick fragrance of wine wafted over. Just by smelling it, he knew that this wine would not be bad. The old eunuch at the side couldn't help but gulp. When he was inspecting the wine just now, he couldn't resist secretly taking a sip. Even now, the strong taste was still lingering in his mind. Good wine. Fiercely drinking a mouthful of strong wine, Emperor Jing's eyes brightened. He praised, Yongla, that girl still knows what I like. She eagerly opened the letter. Part of the content was about the governance of Qing and Fu. Emperor Jing smiled. With her there was no need to even send an imperial censor. After that it was the greetings between father and daughter. Yongla's temper was a bit stubborn, but she had been sensible since she was young. She won his favor the most. Even though they were in the imperial family, the relationship between father and daughter was still very deep. When he read the end, Emperor Jing's expression froze. He showed some shock and murmured, "Anxi County military officer, Li." Seeing this name, a trace of confusion appeared on his face. In the next moment he seemed to remember something and flipped open the memorial again. A moment later, a look of realization appeared on his face. Yongla actually admires this person so much. Never mind, let her do as she wishes. Emperor Jing murmured a few words and suddenly said, "Changda. This old servant is here," the old eunuch said in a low voice. "Draft the edict. Tomorrow have someone send this edict to Qing and Fu." Emperor Jing was in a good mood that night. He finished writing the edict and looked at the unfinished memorial on the table. He waved his hand and said, "I will approve these tomorrow." The old eunuch heard the meaning behind his words and said, "Where will your majesty rest tonight?" Emperor Jing thought for a moment and said, "Announcing Peace Palace." Announcing Peace Palace, concubine Yan's residence. Chapter 146. Outside the Announcing Peace Palace, the old eunuch named Changda looked at the imperial edict in his hand with a hint of doubt in his muddy old eyes. It was really strange that a mere secondary class 8 county lieutenant could be rewarded by the emperor himself. Soon the doubt on his face disappeared. The emperor's heart was hard to predict. He only needed to pass down the edict. As an official of the emperor, he had served 2 generations of emperors and was very clear about what he should do. He looked back at the palace in the night and the old figure disappeared under the palace wall. He didn't know if it was a psychological reason, but he didn't feel anything when he washed his face before. These days he washed his hands with soap in the morning and felt much more refreshed. Although the homemade soap looked a little ugly, it was very useful. Ever since he knew that Xiao Huan used this thing called soap to wash her face in the morning, the few pieces left for Fong and the others were all snatched up by the women in the village. Fong didn't feel anything about it. He just got a basin of water in the morning and washed his face carelessly. Only women and the son-in-law would be so fussy. He only left 1 piece for his mother-in-law and gave the rest to the younger girls. He heard from the son-in-law that he would make a soap with a fragrance in the future and call it fragrant soap. Fong didn't understand why the son-in-law was always fiddling with these things for women. He was a man, but why didn't he have any manliness? Standing in the courtyard early in the morning, waiting to go to the shop with Li Yi, Fong saw him rubbing the soap until his hands and face were covered with it. He accidentally dropped the soap on the stool. Fong shook his head helplessly and let out a long sigh. Son-in-law. Li Yi had just washed the soap off his hands when he suddenly heard Fong's voice. "What's wrong?" Li Yi raised his head and looked at him. "You dropped the soap." Fong pointed at the soap that Li Yi had accidentally dropped and reminded him. Clang. The copper basin on the stool was also accidentally touched by Li Yi and fell to the ground, splashing the water on his face. In the shop, the 4 girls could already take charge of the shop. Li Yi was happy to be free. If he wanted to go to the shop, he would. If he did not want to go, he would stay in the stockade village. He would tell stories to Xiao Huan, talk with Rui about life's ideals, practice martial arts when the weather was good, and fantasize about when he could fly in the sky like Mississippi Lu. Li Xian would occasionally go to the shop to voice out his doubts. There were many problems that were difficult to explain to him according to the current scientific understanding. Li Yi could only subtly instill some thinking methods such as deduction, induction, analogy and so on. He had already given him the stepping stone. As for whether he could break the door of science with this brick, it still depended on his luck. In the meantime, Li Xian also had Li Yi draw a painting for him. More accurately, it was for Wang Fei. Wang Fei's birthday was approaching and what gift to give was a problem. Ning Wang Fu didn't lack anything. Li Xian had racked his brains for this matter. Gift calligraphy and paintings? Mother didn't like it. Give jewelry? Would the dignified Wang Fei lack jewelry? Rare treasures? That would have to be something. After thinking for a long time, the crown prince decided to find another way. The painting that Li Yi had drawn for him last time, he had shown it to Wang Fei like it was a treasure. At that time, Mother seemed to be very interested in the painting. If he could also draw a painting for her, he might be able to create a surprise. Since it was a surprise, he couldn't draw it in front of her. It didn't seem good to bring Li Yi to the Wang Fu to peep at his mother. He could only pick a painting from the Wang Fei's previous paintings and let Li Yi compare it to the painting. This was not difficult for Li Yi. The paintings in this world were the same as other books. He could copy them into his consciousness and draw them out without any mistakes. All he had to do was use some three-dimensional painting techniques. Li Xian's idea wasn't bad. There wasn't a woman who didn't want to keep her youth. Wang Fei wasn't young, but she wasn't even 40 yet. Adding on the fact that she took good care of herself, she only looked to be in her early 30s. If she and Ning Wang worked hard, she might be able to give Li Xian another younger brother or sister. Speaking of Wang Fei's birthday, when Li Xian invited him last time, Li Yi had agreed because he thought that he could give her a few bottles of Ruidu. Perhaps it could be promoted in the upper-class circles of Qing'anfu. However, he didn't think that Ruidu would already be popular before this. There was no need to do anything else. If he had known earlier, he wouldn't have agreed so easily. After all, he didn't belong to that circle. Other than Li Xian, he didn't know anyone else. It would be awkward to go. In his opinion, lying in the yard and sunbathing was more interesting than attending the birthday. 10 taels of silver for a painting. Li Xian was an old customer, so he could get a 9% discount. After rounding it up, it was exactly 10 taels of silver. As a son, it was not enough to just give her a painting. However, other than a painting, what else could he give her? Thinking about it, Li Xian's head hurt. After going one round, it came back to Li Yi. Are we friends? Li Xian looked at Li Yi, his eyes burning. I'm just a commoner. How dare I call myself friends with your highness? Looking at his eyes, Li Yi's heart became a little vigilant. Yesterday he gave him a bar of soap. Did he misunderstand something? One sentence interrupted Li Xian's thoughts. He didn't know what to say next. I've always thought of you as a friend. Li Xian looked at him and said bitterly, to be honest, since the first day we met, have I ever put on airs in front of you? The sudden confession made Li Yi have goosebumps all over his body. He hurriedly made a pause gesture and said, okay, leave it to me. Don't look at me like that. After Li Xian achieved his goal, he left with a satisfied face. He didn't have to worry about anything if he handed this matter to Li Yi. Encountering such a fraud, Li Yi could only shake his head and sigh that he didn't make friends carefully. In comparison, Mingzu was more reliable. She could get a free security guard just by freeloading a few meals and a few glasses of wine. It was so cost-effective. The only thing that made Li Yi a little strange was that in the past 2 days, he always felt that Mingzu sometimes looked at him with a strange expression. Thinking about it later, he always felt that something was not quite right. Chapter 147. In the back hall of Anxi County Government, County Magistrate Liu was sitting in an old-fashioned wooden armchair, leisurely enjoying fragrant tea. Drinking tea was one of his hobbies. County Magistrate Liu didn't have many hobbies. Closing the door and having fun with his concubine in the room was one of them. Next was drinking tea. The tea was good tea, which was given to him by the county magistrate a few days ago. The county magistrate was also a tea lover. County Magistrate Liu had been thinking about his treasured tea leaves for some days, but the county magistrate had been unwilling to part with them. A few days ago, after County Magistrate Zhou was taken away by the magistrate, the county magistrate seemed to have changed into a different person. Not only did he serve good tea readily, but he was also much more humble when talking to him. Having been an official for many years, County Magistrate Liu certainly knew why the county magistrate would change like this. A few days ago, County Magistrate Zhou was found to have taken bribes and used public office for personal gain. Anyway, there were a lot of crimes. He was taken back to the magistrate's office by the magistrate, and he might not have a good life in the future. In the past, these things had seemed extremely normal to them. Of all the officials in the county government, there was probably not a single one who could be described as uncorrupted and impartial. It was harmless to accept some money and make things convenient for others. As long as the matter was not blown out of proportion, even the county magistrate would turn a blind eye to it. The county magistrate had certainly done these things. The problem was that county magistrate Zhou, who was almost the same as him, was taken away in this way. Hearing this news, the county magistrate broke into a cold sweat on the spot. If he was found, wouldn't he end up the same as county magistrate Zhou? After being on tenterhooks for a few days, what he worried about didn't happen. Then he was a little relieved. It seemed that county magistrate Zhou was just a little unlucky, and it was not the higher-ups who wanted to thoroughly investigate these officials. However, although he was a little relieved, he behaved much more restrained. He didn't dare to do any secret tricks, and he kept a good relationship with the county magistrate. If there was any news from the higher-ups, he could know it immediately. Of course, county magistrate Liu accepted the county magistrate's goodwill. At this moment he squinted his eyes and tasted the fragrant tea. He was still thinking about what he had just done with his concubine. Suddenly there came the sound of hurried footsteps outside the door and a yamen runner rushed in. County magistrate Liu raised his eyebrows. Last time county magistrate Zhou had an accident, it was this guy who rushed in. Seeing his flustered look this time, could it be that something big had happened again? She didn't mind that he didn't knock on the door and quickly asked, "What happened?" "My lord." The runner panted heavily and said, "Someone from the front office is here. He came from the capital." "The capital?" County magistrate Liu exclaimed. The people from the capital city did not dare to neglect and hurried to the front hall. A quarter of an hour later, county magistrate Liu changed into his official uniform and followed two eunuchs from the palace to leave the yamen. The two of them were indeed from the capital. The imperial edict could not be faked. But they came all the way from the capital city to announce the imperial edict just to reward a small county magistrate. When did the imperial edict become so worthless? Of course, the imperial edict would not be so cheap. County magistrate Liu had been an official for so many years, but he had only seen it twice. It should be noted that when he took office he only held a letter of appointment in his hand. But now, a county magistrate under his command could be rewarded by His Majesty. How could he be an emperor in the future? First, there was the honorable female arrestor, whom His Excellency warned him not to offend. Later, the county magistrate was rewarded by His Majesty, who must have a powerful background. He couldn't afford to offend them. What was the point of being a county magistrate? Lead the way. Let's go to the Li family village. When they were in the yamen just now, County Magistrate Liu had investigated the soon-to-be County Magistrate Li. At this time, with a group of yamen runners, he led the two people to the Li family village to announce the imperial edict. "You don't have to go to the Li family village." A light voice came from behind. County Magistrate Liu looked back and saw a valiant figure coming out of the county office. "Prince." When the two eunuchs looked back, their faces suddenly changed and they were about to kneel down to salute. Emingsu waved her hand to them and said, "If you want to announce the imperial edict, go directly to the Rui workshop." In the Rui workshop, Li Yi was lazy again and didn't come today. In addition to the four girls, there was only Fong, who was sitting in the corner and dozing off. In his intermittent dream, he followed his son-in-law to earn money and bought a big house. There were servants to serve him in everything. After a long time of torturing the wicked woman at home, she finally allowed him to take a concubine. In his joy, he was about to welcome Miss Hong from the Jade Courtyard back home. "Who is Li Yi?" "His Majesty has an imperial edict. Kneel down and accept it." Suddenly, a loud roar woke Fong up from his dream. His body trembled. The big house was gone, the servants and maids were gone, and Miss Hong was gone. "What are you shouting for? Go to the funeral." Having his beautiful dream interrupted, old Fong was immediately enraged. He did not even see who it was before he scolded the intruder. "How dare you? How dare you?" The two fair-skinned and beardless men's faces darkened. They glared at Fong and said coldly almost at the same time. As eunuchs who delivered imperial edicts, they were fine in the palace. But outside the palace, everyone was respectful and greeted them with a smile. When had they ever been scolded like this? What did this fool say just now? Go to the funeral? He dared to say that His Majesty's imperial edict was a funeral. He was courting death. County Magistrate Lu, who was following them, also felt his eyelids twitching. Where did this fool come from? How could he say such nonsense? What? Do you still want to fight? Fong was still angry because he was woken up from his sweet dream. His eyes widened when he heard the words. He took a step forward and a burst of momentum suddenly pressed over. Was it reasonable to disturb someone's sweet dream? Just now these two guys seemed to call his son-in-law's name. Judging from their posture, were they here to seek revenge? With that thought in mind, the aura emanating from old Fong's body grew even stronger. The two eunuchs' faces changed. Then they became completely cold and said loudly, "Take him down. Those who don't know are not guilty. Those who don't know are not guilty." County Magistrate Lu waved his hand hurriedly before the Yamen runners came in. He looked at Fong and said, "You fool, these two are sent by His Majesty to deliver the imperial edict. Where's Li? Ask him to come out to receive the imperial edict." Receive the imperial edict? Fong looked at the man in the official robe and the two eunuchs. He stood there in a daze and his mind was blank. Several women stood beside the counter and looked over with shock in their eyes. "Where's your son-in-law?" When Fong's heart was in turmoil, a familiar voice came to his ears. "At home." Fong swallowed his saliva and said with a trembling voice. Chapter 148. Compared with the Willow Leaf Village 2 or 3 months ago, the difference was like heaven and earth. Last year there was a drought and the already barren mountainous region had no harvest. Although the imperial court had already reduced taxes for 2 years, there were still many people struggling to feed themselves with just the amount of food they had left in their homes. However, now that he looked at it again, he could finally see some flesh on the bodies of the skinny brats who had been running all over the village. They were holding a large bone in their hands and gnawing on it. There were always 1 or 2 dogs beside them, staring at the bone in the hands of the brats and constantly walking around. The new houses of several families had been built. Their neighbors would often lend a helping hand. In the end, they would ask their wives to cook a good meal to reward their neighbors. For decades, this had been the default habit of the villagers in the stockade. Several men were chatting while working. Suddenly, they heard something coming from the entrance of the village. They looked up and were all stunned. A few silhouettes on horseback entered their line of sight. After entering the stronghold, the people on horseback dismounted unhurriedly. The few of them could clearly see a dozen or so black-clothed officials following behind them as they entered the stronghold. There had never been so many officials in the Willow Leaf Village. Several men's expressions changed slightly. Could it be that someone in the village had committed a crime and these people were here to arrest him? "Look, isn't that Fong?" One of the men saw a familiar figure walking in front and immediately said in surprise, "It's Fong. Why is Fong with the officials? What are these people doing in the village?" Several men were surprised. Seeing these people enter the village, they followed them from a distance and didn't dare to get too close. Until they found that they stopped in front of a courtyard, they couldn't help but exclaim, "Are they here for the first miss?" "No. I'm afraid they are here for the son-in-law." "Is the son-in-law?" Just as their expressions changed, more and more people began to notice the movement here. After all, the Willow Leaf Village was located in the mountains and was not connected to other villages. Usually outsiders rarely came here. This time there were so many people all dressed as officials. It seemed that this matter was unusual. Fong knocked on the door. Li Yi was in the courtyard teaching Xiao Huan how to make her hair into a bun. Hearing the knock on the door, he casually said, "The door is not closed, come in." When he glanced over and saw old Fong, he could not help but be startled. What was wrong with Fong today? Why did he know to knock on the door? However, Li Yi's expression changed slightly when he saw the officers and the 2 unfamiliar men leading them. What was going on? Why were there so many officials? Could it be that old Fong had done something wrong? The little servant girl was also shocked by the situation. Her face was pale and she hid behind Li Yi, looking at the officers nervously. Hearing the movement in front, 2 women walked out of the inner courtyard. Seeing the situation in front of them, Lu Rui's beautiful eyes slightly narrowed, and one hand was already holding the hilt of her sword. Lu Rui's pretty face also changed. They quickly walked to Li Yi's side. Rui turned to look at him and asked, "Husband, what are these people doing?" "Who is Li?" "Come out and receive the imperial edict." The eunuch's shout caused everyone to freeze on the spot. "Receive the imperial edict?" Li Yi's expression changed. "Receive what imperial edict?" Lu's sister Rui looked at him. The eunuch's voice was not low, and the people outside the door also heard him. Everyone looked at each other, and their eyes were full of surprise and doubt. "His Majesty's imperial edict. Why don't you kneel and receive it?" Usually when imperial edicts were announced, many people were scared silly. The eunuch glanced at him and did not find it strange. He said coldly, "Crush." Before Li Yi knelt, County Magistrate Lu and the other officers knelt first. When the imperial edict was announced, it was as if the emperor himself had arrived. Not only did the person who received the imperial edict have to kneel, but the surrounding people also had to kneel. There was another crashing sound, and the villagers outside the door also knelt down. Although they had not seen the imperial edict and did not understand the rules, how could they dare not to kneel when even the officers knelt? Lu Rui removed her hand from the hilt of her sword. After looking at each other, she also knelt. In the Jing kingdom, the current emperor was the most honorable person. This concept was deeply rooted in their blood. Seeing that they knelt, Xiaohuan also followed closely behind. For a moment, other than the two eunuchs, only Li Yi was still standing. He looked around, and a trace of helplessness appeared on his face. He walked in front of the two eunuchs and knelt down, saying, "This commoner receives the imperial edict." Although he really did not want to kneel, he did not want to be accused of disrespecting the emperor. "Even the imperial edict is here. Which bastard framed me?" After kneeling down, he murmured in a low voice. The first person that appeared in his mind was the guy who claimed to be a professor of the prefectural school that he met a few days ago. Other than that, he really could not think of any other reason. When the eunuch heard him murmur, the corner of his mouth twitched, and he almost flew into a rage on the spot. When he thought of the princess's instructions, he suppressed his anger and read the imperial edict. Listening to the eunuch read a lot, Li Yi roughly understood the reason. It meant that the rules for disciples was meritorious and so on, and then there was a lot of praise. Before the eunuch finished, Li Yi already had an idea. "Now, I can't run away from the position of a scholar." When he thought of this, the eunuch had already read to the end. "You are conferred the title of Anxi County Lieutenant, and you will be blessed by the emperor forever." County Lieutenant. Li Yi suddenly raised his head, and his face was full of disbelief. Because of his meritorious service, he was conferred the title of County Lieutenant? How could this be possible? Isn't it too sudden and too big a turn? This is not common sense at all. Who on earth is framing me? County Lieutenant Li quickly received the imperial edict. Seeing him standing there in a daze, County Magistrate Lu could not help but urge him. He took the opportunity to take a few more glances at him, but he still could not believe that this young man would be the county lieutenant in the future. "Can I not receive it?" Li Yi looked at County Magistrate Lu and asked tentatively. It was not easy to meet a kind-looking person. Last time he just said it casually to Emingzu. God bless him, he had never thought of being a county lieutenant. Suddenly, Li Yi seemed to think of something, and his face suddenly showed a look of understanding. "Are you going to defy the imperial edict?" Before County Magistrate Lu opened his mouth, a eunuch looked at him and asked with an unkind look. "Can't I be an official even if I don't want to?" Li Yi looked at him and said, "Since ancient times, there have been many people of noble character and unquestionable integrity who refused to be an official, right? So, they are all dead." The eunuch looked at him and a sneer appeared on his face. Chapter 149. After announcing the imperial edict, the two eccentric eunuchs walked away with sullen faces. According to the usual practice when it came to conferring titles and increasing nobility, the person receiving the imperial edict would always prepare a small gift to express his gratitude. But looking at the current situation, the scholar who did not know what was good for him did not resist the imperial edict, which was already giving them enough face. Over the years, there were many noble and reclusive officials who resigned from their positions. The emperor was wise and magnanimous, so he had never been convicted for this, but he still felt embarrassed. Fortunately, he had listened to Her Highness. Otherwise, he might not have been able to resolve the matter today. The man in the official uniform also left. When Li Yi heard him introducing himself as the county magistrate and his future superior, he realized that he was also the father of the young man who had enmity with him. He had offended his superior before taking office, however, this was not the most important thing. Looking at the neatly folded official uniform and the official seal on it, Li Yi began to feel a little absent-minded again. Did the emperor's brain get kicked by a donkey? Didn't he just copy an article? Why did he make him a county magistrate? What a sin. If he had known this earlier, he wouldn't have copied the disciple rules. He had never thought of throwing himself into the tide of building feudalism. When he had enough money in the future, he would be able to travel when he was bored. If he became a county magistrate, he would have to manage some trivial matters all day long. Wouldn't he be tied to Anxi County? Li Yi's heart was heavy. He was inexplicably appointed an official, and he was not happy. However, the others did not think so. Fong, who was the first to know the news, was still in a daze until now. County magistrate, how did the son-in-law become a county magistrate? In the past, a county magistrate was equivalent to one of the top positions in the stronghold. In this way, it was already a high position that Fong could not imagine. Of course, apart from Fong, those who were still standing outside the door were also dumbfounded. The second aunt had just returned from the chicken coop, and the egg in her hand had already fallen to the ground and broken into pieces. She, who had always been stingy, did not notice this at all. She muttered in a trembling voice, "County Lieutenant, County Lieutenant, County Lieutenant." The expressions of the other direct descendants of the Liu family were also particularly interesting. The Willow Leaf village started with bandits. Since the establishment of the village, they had gradually transitioned from bandits to ordinary farmers. There hadn't been a scholar for decades. Suddenly, a county lieutenant appeared out of nowhere. Thinking that they would have to see the county lieutenant frequently in the future, they immediately became nervous. Upon thinking of certain things, many people started to feel slightly uneasy. After all, he had snatched it back then. Now that the weak scholar had become the county magistrate, would he come back to settle the score with them? Although they did not participate in that incident, it was hard to say whether he would vent his anger on them or not. While everyone was feeling uneasy, the sound of whispers came into the courtyard, which made people feel upset for no reason. Li Yi waved his hand at Fong and said in a low mood, "Close the door. Disperse, disperse." Fong could see that the son-in-law was in a bad mood. He shouted a few words to the people around the door and then closed the door. He continued to look at Li Yi with a puzzled expression. The son-in-law had been made an official by the emperor, which was a great thing. But looking at him, it seemed that he had been robbed of money. Could it be that he felt that the official title was too low for him? Xiao Huan was extremely happy that the son-in-law had been made a high official. But seeing that the son-in-law did not seem to be happy, she did not say anything, but she was very happy in her heart. The son-in-law had become the county magistrate, so wouldn't Xiao Huan be the county magistrate's maid in the future? Husband, what is going on? After everyone left, the courtyard became quiet. Lu Rui looked at Li Yi and there was still a look of surprise on her pretty face. Lu Rui also turned her head to look at him. How did a weak scholar suddenly become a county magistrate? This change was a little hard for her to accept. Would she still be able to rob his things with a clear conscience in the future? I must have been framed. Li Yi said with an ugly expression, gritting his teeth. Fong staggered. If being framed could make him a county magistrate, he would accept all the framing. In Rui's workshop, Li Yi sat at a table, drinking alone to drown his sorrows. He was thinking about how to get rid of the position of county magistrate. Slack in work, corruption and bending the law? It would be a good idea if he could go back home and work as a farmer. But it would not be worth it if he went to jail for this. After all, this was a feudal society that did not care about human rights at all. If the emperor asked him to be an official, then he must be an official. Did the emperor ever ask for the opinions of the people involved? When is county magistrate Li going to be appointed? The position of county magistrate is very important, and it can't be left vacant for too long. Just when Li Yi was racking his brains and thinking hard, a clear and melodious voice came from outside the door. Seeing the female arrestor coming in, Li Yi suddenly stood up and glared at her, asking, "Is it you? Is it you who did this?" Li Yi thought about it over and over again. He felt that no matter how big the hole in the brain of the emperor of Jing country was, it was impossible for him to just rely on a piece of rules for disciples to confer him the position of a county officer. If there was no one behind this, he would not believe it even if he was beaten to death. And Arrestor Li, who had a powerful background, was his primary suspect. You said you wanted to be the county magistrate. Why? I helped you, but you not only don't say thank you but also blame me. Li Emingzu sat opposite him, took a wine cup and said lightly after filling it with wine. She did not deny it, which meant she admitted it. It's really you. Thinking that she was the one who set him up, Li Yi suddenly became furious. This ungrateful person ate his food and drank his wine, but in the end she bit the hand that fed her. She did not care about his kindness at all, and even dug such a big hole for him to jump into. After drinking the wine in her cup, the female arrestor frowned and said, "What wine is this? It's as light as water. Where's your strong wine? Take it out quickly." Li Yi pulled the wine pot to his side and took the wine cup from her hand. He stared at her with fire in his eyes. Why the hell would she drink? There was no wine and he didn't even give her water. The female arrestor was not angry at all. She crossed her arms, looked at him and said lightly, "What? Didn't you say you wanted to be the county magistrate?" "Who said I?" Li Yi had only said half a sentence before he was rendered speechless. At this moment, a familiar scene appeared in his mind. What's so good about being a lowly official? There's no rank and I'm ordered around all day. It's meaningless. If I want to be an official, I should at least be a county magistrate, or at least a county magistrate. What's the point of being an official? What's the point? What is it? The words that he said to Emingzu at that time echoed in his mind for a long time. Damn it, my mouth is so cheap. Li looked up to the sky and let out a long sigh after being tricked by his strength. It's not death, it's self-destruction. If you don't seek death, you won't die. The ancients were right. Chapter 150. After figuring out the cause of the matter, Li Yi felt even more upset in his heart. Being cheated by others and being cheated by oneself were two completely different feelings. He raised his head to look at Emingzu and sighed in his heart. This girl was really honest, he was just saying it casually. Who would have thought that anyone could become a county lieutenant? Moreover, he didn't expect that this honest girl would take it so seriously. If he had known that this would be the result, he wouldn't have said that it would be a county lieutenant. At the very least, he would have been a prefectural magistrate. While he was thinking about this, Emingzu had already taken out a small unopened wine jar from the corner of the counter. She sat back at the table with satisfaction and took back the wine cup from Li Yi's hand to refill it. The cup that he drank just now was at most water wine. This scholar's alcohol tolerance was probably similar to that cheap cousin of his. You have a say in the emperor's side? Li Yi came back to his senses and didn't blame her in his heart. Sort of. Emingzu nodded as a tacit agreement. Smelling the fragrance of the wine, a trace of satisfaction flashed in her eyes and she picked up the wine cup. Li Yi looked at her and asked tentatively, "Then how about we make a deal? You don't want to be a county lieutenant, but a prefectural magistrate?" Emingzu didn't manage to swallow a mouthful of wine and spat it out. Li Yi, who was sitting right in front of her, was caught off guard. He was caught off guard and the wine was sprayed all over his face. He wiped the wine off his face and looked at her with a stiff expression. "Do you think a prefectural magistrate is a cabbage?" Even someone as calm as her couldn't help but lose her composure after hearing Li Yi's words. Not to mention a prefectural magistrate, even the appointment and dismissal of a county magistrate wasn't something she could control. Changing to a prefectural magistrate? He really dared to think. After throwing him a supercilious look, she stood up and walked outside. The position of a county lieutenant cannot be left vacant. If there's nothing else, you should report to the county government early. After walking out of the door, he turned back and picked up the wine jar, saying, "I'm taking the wine away." Li Yi stared blankly at her disappearing figure, feeling as if he had been betrayed. "I heard that you're going to be a county lieutenant?" Zhou Xian asked in surprise as soon as he walked into the shop. "How did you know?" Li Yi sat on the chair listlessly, raised his head and glanced at him. After asking, he felt like he had asked a useless question. In Qing and Fu, what could be hidden from him? Emingzu said so. Zhou Xian sat opposite him and said, Emmingzi said that with your abilities, you have nothing to do anyway. It would be a pity if you don't find something to do. I didn't think that Emmingzi would have such an evaluation of you. Li Xian's tone was a bit gloomy. Ever since he was young, this cousin of his had always ignored him. Not only him but others as well. This made Li Xian feel very defeated. This was the first time he had heard her use the word capable to describe a man. He looked at Li Yi seriously and felt that there was nothing special about him. Although he was outstanding enough compared to others, compared to himself there was still a small gap. Of course he still had something to ask of Li Yi. He only thought these words in his heart and didn't say them out loud. What? I have nothing to do anyway. It would be a pity if you don't find something for me to do? The expression on Li Yi's face froze. When he thought of the indifferent expression on the bailiff's face when she said these words, he couldn't help but feel a surge of anger in his heart. So she did it on purpose. When he walked in the stockade the day before, the people around him avoided him like they were avoiding the plague. Everywhere he went, people retreated. The naughty child wanted to come over and greet him but was held under the arms of the adults in the family. They quickly hid in the house and closed the door. 2 pairs of eyes peeked out from the crack of the door. When he encountered someone he couldn't avoid, he would stand where he was and call out, "County Lieutenant," in a trembling voice. After that he would run away. Even the dogs in the stockade couldn't catch up to him. Other than Fong, even the people who were close to Rui and her sister were somewhat uneasy when they saw him. It was even more difficult to explain to the family. The little servant girl was heartless and hadn't changed much from before. When she was doing things, she would sometimes secretly cover her mouth and laugh. No one knew what she was thinking. As for Rui, he couldn't tell her that the emperor was crazy and suddenly wanted to make him a county lieutenant. Last night, Li Yi rested in the shop. When he thought of how to explain it to Rui, the two of them would have a good talk. Do you still remember the psychology of women and the 36 ways to woo a girl that I mentioned last time? Li Yi looked at Li Xian and asked. Of course I remember. Li Xian nodded. This was what Li Yi promised to teach him last time, but he hadn't fulfilled it yet. I'll teach you these things now. Li Yi said with a serious face. You can go and woo the bailiff now. Since she made him worry, Li Yi certainly didn't want her to live comfortably. Now he would teach Li Xian how to woo a girl shamelessly and annoy her to death. Why do you want to woo her? Li Xian was stunned when he heard it, then he said in shock, she is my cousin. This time it was Li Yi's turn to be puzzled. Then why did you ask me to write a poem last time? I just want her to see me in a different light. Li Xian, who had been ignored since childhood, wanted to see different emotions from her as her cousin. However, this goal had been achieved a few days ago. Speaking of which, I still have to thank you. Last time I made a bet with Emmingzi. Which of the 2 rocks of different sizes would fall first? Thinking of her expression at that time, Li Xian couldn't help but smile. He cupped his fist and said to Li Yi. Li Yi found that he had been wrong all this time. It turned out that this guy only wanted to show off in front of Emmingzi. In this world, if someone wanted to woo his cousin, his legs would still be broken. By the way, you can continue with The Psychology of Women and 36 Ways to Woo a Girl that you mentioned just now. Obviously, Li Xian was still very interested in the topic he just talked about. I forgot. Li Yi waved his hand. The idea of letting Li Xian annoy the bailiff also failed, so he immediately lost interest. After giving a few words to the girls, he started to walk out of the door. Where are you going? Li Xian asked. Li Yi didn't answer, so Li Xian hurriedly followed him. In the Anxi County government office, Li Yi and Li Xian were stopped by the Yamen runner at the door. The Yamen runner stopped them and asked, Who are you? What business do you have in the county government office? Li Yi took out his waist token and waved it in front of the Yamen runner. The Yamen runner's expression immediately changed. He bowed and said, Lord County Lieutenant. Seeing the two of them walk into the county government office, the Yamen runner patted his chest after they disappeared. That scholarly young man just now was the new Lord County Lieutenant? He was too young. Just when the Yamen runner was thinking whether the new Lord County Lieutenant was reliable, County Magistrate Liu was a little distressed in the county government office. Chapter 151. In the court, County Magistrate Liu was hearing an ordinary theft case. As a county magistrate, he was in charge of the county's government affairs, so he couldn't do everything by himself. Usually, these small cases were handled by County Lieutenant Zhou. However, County Lieutenant Zhou was still in prison, and the newly appointed County Lieutenant Li hadn't come to the county government office yet, so he could only temporarily take on the duties of County Lieutenant. These days he was much busier than usual, and he didn't even have time to fool around with his concubine. In a county, the county magistrate was responsible for coordinating the county's government affairs. The county deputy's main duty was to assist the county magistrate in administration. The registrar was responsible for checking documents and supervising the county's administration. The county lieutenant was in charge of justice, arresting thieves, hearing cases, making judgments, and collecting taxes. He was the busiest among the four people. Now, besides the county magistrate, even the county lieutenant's affairs were all on him. How could County Magistrate Liu not be distressed? Why hasn't County Lieutenant Li come yet? At this moment, a government runner came to report that the newly appointed County Lieutenant Li had arrived. County Magistrate Liu was overjoyed and went out to greet him in person. From a distance he saw County Lieutenant Li and a young man walking towards him. The young man was talking to County Lieutenant Li with a smile, but County Lieutenant Li was obviously not in a good mood and seemed to be too lazy to talk with him. "That's child." County Magistrate Liu vaguely felt that the young man was a little familiar. When he remembered, he suddenly stopped and was stunned. County Magistrate Liu was fortunate enough to follow his lordship to Prince Ning's mansion and saw Prince Ning. Because of the special identity of Prince Ning and his handsome appearance, County Magistrate Liu had a deep impression of him, so he recognized him at a glance. Seeing the heir in the county government was enough to surprise him. Last time, County Magistrate Zhou had offended the heir, so he ended up like this. But what surprised him more was that the new County Magistrate Li actually talked and laughed with the heir, and it seemed that they had a good relationship. Looking carefully, it was not talking and laughing at all. It was obviously Prince Ning's one-sided talk, but County Lieutenant Li didn't even bother to pay attention to him. What's the background of this county lieutenant under my command? He was merely a minor 8th-rank county officer, yet he was able to be bestowed the title by the emperor himself. He even chatted with the Crown Prince of Ningguang and attracted the attention of Her Royal Highness. Yesterday, the eunuch who delivered the imperial edict had already vaguely revealed Arrestor Li's identity to him and asked him to serve him carefully. After knowing the truth, County Magistrate Liu broke out in a cold sweat on the spot. Even though he already had some guesses in his heart, the truth was even more terrifying than he had imagined. The county government already had such a great figure. Was there going to be another one today? Could it be that County Magistrate Li was also? Yes, it must be. His surname is also Li. Li is the surname of the emperor. Connecting all the things related to County Magistrate Li, County Magistrate Zhou broke into a cold sweat again. The identity of the Xianxia of Li family village must be fake. Apart from being frightened, he was also complaining incessantly in his heart. This damned Anxi County government wasn't a blessed land. Why did all the big shots come here? Any one of their subordinates was someone he couldn't afford to offend. What was the point of being the county magistrate? Too vexed. Thinking of this, County Magistrate Liu felt like there was a ball of fire in his heart that was about to be vented. He strode over with a bright smile on his face. "Your Highness, please forgive me for not welcoming you earlier." Li Xian waved his hand casually and said, "Don't be so polite. I'm just here to accompany County Magistrate Li. Just do your thing and don't worry about me." He said these words casually, but County Magistrate Liu, who had been an official for many years, was shrewd and cunning. He immediately understood the meaning of the prince's words. He was telling County Magistrate Liu that he had a close relationship with County Magistrate Li and that he could do as he pleased in the future. County Magistrate Liu understood. When he looked at Li Yi, he smiled even more and said, "The imperial court sympathizes with us lowly officials and allows us to delay our appointment for 1 month after we receive the appointment. County Magistrate Li, you really don't have to worry." What County Magistrate Liu said was the truth. In this dynasty, the previous dynasty, and even the dynasty before that, officials had enough time to take up their appointment after receiving the appointment letter. In order to avoid corruption and forming cliques for personal gain, Since ancient times, officials were not allowed to take up their posts in their birthplace. Because of the long journey, in order to give them enough time to take up their posts, the imperial court gave them a month's time. However, County Magistrate Li's situation was a little different. His Majesty had personally conferred him the title of Anxi County Magistrate, so there was no need for him to travel long distances. Normally he could take up his post on the same day. However, County Magistrate Lu knew that Li Yi was reluctant to take up his post and presumably didn't want to come to the Yamen so early, so he might as well do him a favor. County Magistrate Lu, who had been looking forward to Li Yi taking up his post as soon as possible, instantly changed his mind after seeing the scene just now. He didn't expect the imperial court to have such a humane system. Li Yi's mood became a little better, but only a little better. He could avoid it for a day or a month, but he couldn't avoid it for a lifetime. What was supposed to come would come back, and he couldn't run away from the position of County Magistrate Lu. At this moment County Magistrate Lu said, "I still have a case to hear. Would County Magistrate Li and Heir Li be willing to have a look?" Since he knew that he didn't have to take up his post immediately, Li Yi didn't want to stay in the Yamen for a second longer. Zhou Xian was a little interested in this and said, "Isn't it the duty of a county magistrate to hear a case? Why don't you go and have a look?" Li Yi, who didn't want to go at first, was a little shaken after hearing his words. After being dragged to the court by Zhou Xian, County Magistrate Lu didn't introduce them. He ordered a Yamen runner to bring 2 chairs and sat back on the main seat. Then he slammed the gavel and looked at the person kneeling down below, saying loudly, "How dare you? Someone clearly saw you steal the silver from your master, but you refused to admit it. Do you want me to punish you?" "Your Honor, I'm wronged." The kneeling young man kowtowed a few times and said with a bitter expression, "This lowly one has been wronged. That Wang heir and this lowly one have always been at odds. It is clear that he stole the silver and framed me. This lowly one really did not steal master's silver." "You're lying. Although we don't get along, it's true that I saw you steal the silver with my own eyes. Why should I frame you?" A person kneeling beside him immediately said, "Your Honor, I'm really wronged." The young man kowtowed again. County Magistrate Lu asked several times, but the 2 people insisted on their own words. However, he couldn't find other evidence, so he couldn't help feeling a headache. He began to miss County Magistrate Zhou a little. "County Magistrate Li, what do you think of this case?" He got up and walked to the court, looking at Li Yi and asking. He decided to liven up the atmosphere and ease his embarrassment. He didn't have any hope that this new county magistrate could solve the case. Not until then did the runners know that the young man who came in with County Magistrate Lu was actually the new county magistrate of this county. They were all shocked. It was said that this county magistrate was appointed by His Majesty, but they didn't expect that he looked so young. However, this county magistrate came at the right time. County Magistrate Lu obviously wanted to shift the blame. Hearing the familiar line of County Magistrate Lu, Li Yi felt that he could change his name to Li Yuanfeng. He cupped his hands to County Magistrate Lu and looked at the 2 people in the court. Thinking that he would have to deal with these trivial things all day in the future, he became more agitated and his face darkened. He pointed at the young man who was accused and said loudly, "When you argued just now, you repeated your words and raised your voice, which showed that you were lying. In just a few words, you rubbed your nose 5 times, which showed that you were trying to cover up the truth. Your right thumb kept rubbing, which showed that you were panicking. Last but not least, you look shifty-eyed and ugly, which means that you are not a good person. If you didn't steal the silver, who else could it be?" Speaking of this, Li Yi's voice suddenly sank. "Guards, drag him out and behead him." You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.